A 73-year-old woman vanishes without a trace. Her family, who never truly appreciated all she did, begins to feel her absence as a weight on their souls. But what they don't know is that the silence of their grandmother, Mary, hid secrets, and one of them will change absolutely everything. Breakfast was already served, the table was set, the coffee was hot. But Mary wasn't there. Claire sat down as she did every morning, phone in hand, scrolling through the screen while the kids fought over the remote. Robert came down from his room, yawning, and asked without looking up, "Where's my mum?" Claire shrugged without taking her eyes off her phone. "I don't know. She hasn't come out of her room." But when Robert went to look for her, he found the bed made, the closet empty, and a single folded note on the pillow. It had no recipient. It had no date. It just said, "When a person stops being seen, they also stop existing here. Thank you for confirming that I no longer have a place." The entire house seemed to freeze. Robert felt a pressure in his chest. Claire turned pale. And the kids, who hadn't even noticed her absence until that moment, began to call her name. "Grandma! Granny!" But Mary was gone. And if you've made it this far, I ask you for something very simple. Give us a like, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification, because this is just getting started. And what's going to be revealed later on, you won't believe. And leave me a word in the comments. Invisible. Because that's what Mary was for years. And now her absence is going to scream so loudly that no one will be able to ignore her anymore. Mary Helen Harrison was 73 years old, and every day, from the moment the sun barely peeked over the Smoky Mountains, she was already on her feet. She traveled from Appalachia to New York City years ago, when Robert, her only son, called her desperate because he couldn't pay the rent, and his wife, Claire, had lost her job. Mary sold the small little cottage she had back in the mountains and moved in with them. "It'll only be for a few months, Mum, I swear," Robert had told her, his voice breaking. That was 4 years ago. Since then, Mary lived in a small room next to the laundry area, with no window, an old bed, a broken shelf, and a cross she herself hammered into the wall. But still, every day she did the laundry, ironed, cooked, and took care of her 2 grandchildren, Ethan and Sophia. She asked for nothing. She didn't go out. She didn't bother anyone. She only lived to serve. And in silence, she carried a sadness that no one seemed to notice. Because every gesture of affection she gave, every meal she prepared with care, like meatloaf or mac and cheese, every piece of clothing neatly folded in the drawers, was invisible. Claire rarely looked her in the eye. The kids referred to her as the lady who's always in the kitchen. And Robert came home late, ate dinner, and locked himself away to rest. Until the day before she disappeared, while Mary was washing the dishes with her cracked hands, Claire walked past her with an expression of disdain. She glanced at her and snapped, "You know what? You don't do anything special. Everything you do is your obligation. You live here, you eat here, so the least you can do is work." Mary didn't answer. She didn't even turn around. She just lowered her gaze and felt something break deep inside her chest. That was the exact moment. The invisible line that once crossed has no return. The next morning, Mary left without a sound. She didn't take a suitcase, only a grey cardigan, her cane, and a small cardboard box tied with a string. In that box, she kept something no one knew existed, and though the family took hours to notice she was gone, when they finally did, it was already too late. She had left. But not on a whim, not out of anger, but for something much deeper. Because when a woman spends so many years being ignored, there comes a time when she no longer waits to be seen. She leaves, and by leaving, she makes everyone finally look. Do you realize? This was only the first day without Mary. But what that family is about to discover in her absence will either destroy them or transform them forever. The house looked the same. The same furniture, the same dull colours on the walls, the same kids yelling in the morning. But something in the air was no longer right. As if the soul of the place had left with that woman everyone took for granted. Robert paced back and forth with the paper in his hand. The brief note his mother had left didn't have a name, but every word hurt him as if it had been written in blood. Claire, sitting in the living room, avoided looking at him. Sophia and Ethan, the children, played on the floor, still unaware that something serious was happening. "Are you sure she didn't go with a friend?" Claire asked without much interest, taking a sip of cold coffee. "What friend, Claire?" Robert said, visibly upset. "My mum doesn't have friends. Since she came to live with us, she hasn't even stepped outside alone." Claire didn't answer. She just pursed her lips, uncomfortable. Robert squeezed the paper. He went back to his mother's room. It was spotless, as always. The bed neatly made, the clothes perfectly folded on the shelf, the rosary hanging on the wall. But there was something else that bothered him. The cane was gone. So was her grey cardigan, and her low-heeled shoes, and especially the little box she always hid under the bed, the one she said contained things bikinis from her youth. In the kitchen, the pot of chili was still warm. Breakfast was already served, as if she had left everything ready before leaving. "How long has she been gone?" Robert asked again. Claire looked at the clock without much interest. "I don't know. About 4 or 5 hours. And that didn't strike you as odd?" "I thought she went out to buy something. She didn't tell me anything." Robert clenched his teeth. He felt a knot in his stomach, a mix of guilt and desperation he couldn't name. He walked toward the dining room and stared at the table. The food was still there. The donut his mother used to buy at Mr. Johnson's bakery, the cinnamon-spiced coffee, the napkins carefully folded. Everything was in its place. Except her. He slumped into the chair, defeated. Claire approached him with her arms crossed. "You can't make me feel guilty," she said, in a dry tone. "I didn't kick her out. I didn't even speak harshly to her." "Are you sure about that?" Claire looked away. "I just told her that she should help out more, but you know how she is. She always makes a drama out of everything." Robert looked at her with reddened eyes. "Do you think doing laundry, ironing, cooking, taking care of the kids, all of that wasn't helping?" "Well, she lived here. What did you want? For us to pay her?" Claire's words cut like knives. It was then that Sophia approached the dining room, dragging a sheet of drawings. She showed it to Robert. "Daddy, look. Granny told me she was going to frame this drawing. Now who is going to put it on the wall?" Robert didn't know what to say. The silence filled the house again. That kind of silence that hurts, that weighs, that judges. As if all the walls were screaming what no one dared to say out loud, that they had turned Mary into a useful shadow. An unpaid employee, without a voice, without space. For 4 years, Mary Helen was the one who cooked for everyone, the one who packed the kids' backpacks, the one who watched them when they were sick, the one who ironed Robert's shirts and mended torn socks. And now, her absence was noticeable in every corner. Claire went up to her room, her eyes glassy. Robert stayed alone in the kitchen. The donut was already hard. The coffee cold. It was then that he noticed something else. On the refrigerator, between some empty bottles, there was a handwritten recipe. He recognized his mother's handwriting. It was the recipe for the apple pie she used to make every year in November, back when they still lived in Appalachia. Seeing it, Robert felt a punch in the chest. because suddenly he understood that it wasn't just the food that was missing. It was the warmth, the tenderness, the quiet presence of a woman who had given everything without expecting anything. He got up, walked back to his mother's room, and slowly opened her closet. He checked every drawer. At the very back, hidden behind some old handkerchiefs, he found a yellow envelope, sealed with a red string. He took it carefully. It was heavy, and on the back, written in pencil, was a single word: confession. Robert swallowed. The envelope trembled in his hands. And even though he didn't yet know what it contained, something inside him told him that once he opened it, nothing would ever be the same. Robert held the envelope with both hands for long minutes. The word confession written on the back left him breathless. He turned it over and over as if the simple touch might reveal something before he opened it. He didn't. Not yet. He placed it on the nightstand and sat in front of it, looking at the small room that his mother had inhabited for years without complaint, without asking for anything, without being seen. He remembered something he had buried a long time ago. One night, years back, when he had just turned 35, he had lost everything. His job as a supervisor in a textile factory, the rented apartment in the Queens neighborhood, the car he had just finished paying off. Debts were drowning him, and Claire was pregnant with Ethan. It was then that he called his mother, crying, pleading. "Mom, I have nowhere to go. I need help. I don't have a way to feed my family." Mary didn't hesitate. She listened in silence from her room in Appalachia, and that same week she sold the property where she had lived for more than 3 decades. Her only possession, the place that held her wedding photos, the portrait of her deceased mother, and the memories of her childhood framed on the walls. She sold everything. And with the money, she paid off her son's debts, rented a bigger house for him in New York City, and moved in with them into a back room, without ventilation, with an old bed she put together herself. She never complained. She never mentioned what she had left behind. "I'll take care of the kids while you get back on your feet, son," she said with a smile when they arrived at the new house. "I just need a place to sleep, that's all." At the time, Robert saw it as a natural act, as something any mother would do. But now, standing in that same room, with Mary's absence weighing on his shoulders, he understood that it was not a common gesture. It was a sacrifice, and no one had thanked her for it. He opened the closet one more time. He checked among the folded sheets, the carefully ironed handkerchiefs, and found a hardback notebook, brown, without a name. He opened it slowly. It was an account book. Mary had written down every expense since she moved in with them, not because she was claiming the money, but because she had a habit of organizing. It was all there. What she bought at the grocery store, what she paid from her small pension for Sophia's school supplies, Claire's medication when she had bronchitis, Ethan's new uniform for the school festival. And among those pages, Robert saw a phrase written in a different hand. Firmer, deeper. "My son is worth more than my house, but I hope one day he understands what a mother gives when she has nothing left to give." The words hit him in the chest. He dropped the notebook and covered his face with his hands. When did he stop seeing her? When did he start treating her like an employee and not like the woman who had raised him on her own without anyone's support? He heard footsteps in the hallway. It was Claire, calling him for lunch. "Robert, lunch is served." "Come down, please." He didn't answer. He looked down at the yellow envelope that was still on the table. He picked it up and put it in his jacket pocket. He left the room without saying anything and sat down at the table. Claire served rice with eggs. The dining room was silent. "I couldn't find any sandwich bread," Claire said softly without looking at him. I don't know how your mum did it, but there's nothing in the pantry. Sophia played with her fork, pushing the rice around without appetite. Daddy, is Granny mad? Robert didn't know what to answer. Granny was never mad, Ethan interrupted. She always waited for me at the door when I came home from school, and she made me hot cocoa. Claire pressed her lips together. Robert noticed her eyes were damp, but he didn't say anything. The food grew cold on the table. That night, Robert locked himself in his room, turned on the bedside lamp, and took out the envelope. He opened it carefully. Inside, there were several sheets of handwritten paper with the same shaky handwriting as his mother. It wasn't a criminal confession, nor a farewell letter. It was her story, one he didn't know. It began like this. I was not born strong. I became strong when I had to choose between crying and staying alive. This is the story I never told you. Robert took a deep breath and began to read. But he didn't imagine that at the end of those pages he would find a truth he was not prepared to accept. The letters on the first page trembled with every word. It wasn't the kind of trembling that comes from physical exhaustion, but the one that comes from the deepest sadness. Robert continued reading, his stomach tight, and a new feeling he didn't know how to name. It wasn't just remorse. It was shame. When you were a child, Mary wrote, I used to sit on the edge of the bed and watch you sleep. I would stroke your hair and wonder if one day you would understand how much love fits into the heart of a mother who raises a child alone. I promised you would never lack for anything, and I kept it, even if it meant I had to go without everything. Robert paused. Tears blurred his vision. His mother had never told him details of her youth, much less her marriage. She was always a woman of silences, of brief smiles, of busy hands. And now, on those yellowed sheets, she was finally telling her story. He read on. Your father was not an easy man. He had two faces, one for the street, one for the house. I learned to keep quiet, to pretend everything was fine, because in those years a woman couldn't say she felt alone, even if she was. The words weighed like stones in Robert's chest. He never knew his father. Mary always said he had died young, and that was true, but she never told him how they lived before that happened. He continued reading. When he left, he didn't leave anything. No house, no money, no future. But I already had the most important thing, you. And for you, I worked washing other people's clothes, cleaning strangers' houses, and selling sandwiches on weekends at the local market. My bones ached, but not my heart, because you grew up healthy, happy, and that was all I needed. Robert closed his eyes. The image of his mother doing laundry in the early hours, in that damp backyard of his childhood, hit him like a memory he hadn't appreciated enough. Mary had given everything, absolutely everything, without expecting recognition. Not gifts, not days off, not thanks. And he had repaid her with oblivion. The last page was different. It was written with more force, as if his mother, tired of swallowing everything, had decided to finally speak. Claire never liked me. I knew it from the first day. I respected her. I never interfered in your relationship, nor criticized how she raised the children. But what hurt me wasn't her rejection. What broke my soul was seeing you allow it. How you were extinguishing me over the years, Robert. How you stopped seeing me, as if I were part of the furniture. A useful grandma, a silent maid. Robert let the sheets fall onto the bed. Claire. He remembered the first time his mother and his wife argued. It was a silly thing. Mary had made soup instead of salad, because that's what she could afford at the grocery store. Claire yelled at her in front of the children. She told her she wasn't going to eat old-fashioned food, and Mary retreated to her room without a word. At the time, he didn't intervene. He didn't say anything. And that silence, he now knew, was what began to break his mother's heart. He put the sheets back in the envelope and stayed there, in silence, looking at the ceiling, while the whole house seemed to breathe differently. Mary's room, without her, carried another weight. The walls held the years of service, the hidden tears, the ignored gestures. He heard the kids in the living room. The TV was on low. Claire was folding laundry. It seemed like just another day, but he knew it wasn't. He got up, went to the hallway, and watched his wife from the doorway. "Do you remember when you said my mom didn't do anything special?" Claire turned, surprised. She put a blouse in the drawer and answered coldly, "And why are you bringing that up now?" "Because I just read what she wrote. And you said that to her, didn't you?" She looked away, uncomfortable. "It was just a comment. I was upset. It wasn't that serious." Robert took a step forward. "Do you know that comment was the last thing she heard from you before she disappeared?" Claire swallowed. "What are you talking about?" "That she's not here anymore. And not just physically. She left because she got tired of being invisible. She got sick of giving you everything, of giving us everything, without receiving anything in return." Claire wanted to reply, but she couldn't. Her lips moved without making a sound. For the first time, something in her broke too. Robert went back to his mother's room. He opened a small box on the shelf. Inside were photographs. One of them, taken more than 30 years ago, showed Mary in front of her old home in Appalachia, with a shy smile and a hand-embroidered dress. She had a sparkle in her eyes he no longer remembered. On the back, something was written in pencil. "My home wasn't big, but I was happy there." Robert held it between his fingers and closed his eyes. It was already night. And for the first time since Mary disappeared, Robert knew for sure that he wouldn't find her by chance. It wouldn't be enough to wait for her. He would have to go look for her. But not just in the literal sense. He would have to look for her in everything she left written, in everything they ignored, in everything they took from her, even in what she never dared to say. Dawn was breaking, and the New York City sky began to lighten behind the heavy curtains of the utility room. The city was still sleeping, but Mary was already dressed. She didn't move in a hurry. Every gesture was done with a deep calm, as if she had been practicing every move of that morning for months. She put on her grey cardigan, the one with big buttons, the one that kept her warmest when her bones ached from the cold. She tied her scarf tightly over her chest, took her cane, which was now more an extension of her body than a support, and carefully opened the cardboard box she kept under her bed. Inside were things no one in that house knew about. A faded photo of her mother holding her as a child, a small medal with the image of St. Jude that her grandmother had given her, and a letter she never delivered. Also, a few folded bills, her secret savings, saved dollar by selling cookies in the first years she lived in New York. That box was her memory, her history, her dignity wrapped in silence. She left no note. She didn't write goodbye. The only thing she had wanted to say, she had already written the day before, on that simple sheet she left on the pillow. It was enough. She didn't need explanations. She needed to disappear. Not as punishment, not as blackmail, but as someone who finally recognizes that the place where she lives no longer sees her. Mary walked slowly down the hallway, stopping for an instant in front of Sophia and Ethan's room. She listened to their light breathing, and although her heart tightened in her chest, she didn't open the door. She didn't want to awaken a bitter goodbye in them. They didn't deserve to carry that absence. She descended the stairs like someone stepping away from the world. In the kitchen, the table was already set. She had left the chili on the stove, the bread sliced, the coffee freshly brewed. Her last breakfast for them. She placed the box on the seat of a chair and looked at the dining room one last time. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She just sighed, like someone letting go of a weight she had carried for too many years. And then she opened the door, crossed the threshold, and disappeared into the shadows of the dawn. No one saw her leave. No one stopped her. The city was beginning to stir, to wake up. Buses passed on Avenue D. A dog barked in the distance. At Mr. Samuel's deli, they were already rolling up the metal gate. It was Tuesday. Just another day for everyone, but not for her. She walked to the bus stop. It wasn't an easy trip, but she knew it well. She had done it many times, although no one in the house knew it. Sometimes she went out in the afternoons when she thought everyone was asleep. She walked aimlessly, sat in the park in Central Park, watched people. She reminded herself she was alive. And that day, finally, she was going somewhere that wasn't the kitchen. She got on the bus and asked for a one-way ticket. No one looked at her twice. She was just another old woman among many, but inside her, something was lighting up. Something that had been extinguished for years. A small flame, yes, but her own. Meanwhile, back at the house, the clock struck 7:20. Ethan was the first to notice something different. "Where's Granny?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. Sophia came into the kitchen and saw the table set. "Why didn't she wake us up? She always does." Claire came down from her room with a frown. "Hasn't she left her room?" Robert, in the living room, was already sitting with his hands clasped, looking at the open door of his mother's room. The bed made, the room empty. "She's not here," he said, without raising his voice. "What do you mean she's not here?" Claire asked, now with a worried tone. "She left." "What do you mean she left? Where to?" Robert didn't answer. He just got up and went into the room. His eyes scanned the corners, the empty closet, the box she always kept under the bed, was gone. The cane, too. Neither was her cardigan, and at that instant, he understood that it hadn't been a temporary outing. She hadn't gone to the store. She hadn't gone out for air. His mother had decided to leave, and they didn't know where to, or how, or with whom. Robert went out to the patio and looked toward the street, as if he could suddenly see her walking on the sidewalk. But there was only traffic, noise, and a city that kept spinning as if nothing had happened. "Daddy," Sophia said, taking his hand, "did Granny leave because she doesn't love us anymore?" Robert knelt down in front of his daughter and hugged her tightly. He didn't have answers. Not yet. He only knew that what his mother had endured, she couldn't endure any more. And while he tried to compose himself, in a corner of the house, inside the lowest drawer of the laundry sink, something remained forgotten. A small sealed envelope, addressed to Robert. One that Mary didn't dare to leave on her bed. One that could change everything her son thought he knew about her. But that, they didn't know yet. The first 24 hours without Mary passed like a quiet disruption. There were no shouts or immediate chaos. Not at first. Just an emptiness, difficult to name. As if someone had turned off the warmth of the home, but left the lights on. Claire made breakfast, scrambled eggs and burnt toast. The coffee came out watery, tasteless. Sophia, sitting at the table, asked, "Where is Granny? She always braids my hair before school." Claire remained silent while serving the plates with clumsy movements. Ethan barely touched his food. "Daddy, is Granny coming back?" Robert came down with a serious face, tired, He had spent most of the night rereading the letters, searching the drawers for something more that would help him understand his mother. He found nothing, only more questions. "I don't know, son," he replied, stroking his hair, "but we're going to do everything we can to make sure she does." No one in that house fully understood what was happening, but everyone, in silence, was starting to feel it. What at first seemed only the absence of one person soon became the total breakdown of the routine. Dirty clothes began to pile up. The kitchen was messy. Claire was irritated by everything. Robert locked himself in his room more than usual. Sophia cried at night. Ethan stopped doing his homework. Mary didn't just cook. She didn't just do laundry. Mary held the house together from the inside without anyone noticing. Thursday afternoon, Claire tried to make a shopping list. She sat down with paper and pen in the kitchen, looking at the almost empty refrigerator. She tried to remember what kind of rice her mother-in-law bought, where she got the freshest vegetables, what brand of soap she used for the kids' clothes. She couldn't answer any of those questions. Robert came home from work and found her crying in silence, with a blank list in front of her. "I don't know how to do this," Claire said without looking at him. He walked over and sat across from her. He didn't know how to help her either. But for the first time, he didn't judge her. He just understood that they were together, broken, incomplete, without that woman who for years had supported everyone without being asked or thanked. "We have to find her," he said, his voice firm. "But where? We have no idea where she could have gone." "Maybe someone does know." That night, after putting the children to bed, Robert went to the laundry area. Something had been unsettling him for days, a vague memory of having seen his mother hide papers in a compartment under the sink. He knelt down, moved the bucket, the bottles of bleach, the old rags. At the very back, hidden by a damp piece of cardboard, he found a white envelope wrapped in a plastic bag. He opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a sheet of paper folded in four, written in Mary's handwriting. "If one day I leave and don't come back, don't look for me with anger or with shame. Look for me with the truth in your heart." Below, there was an address written in blue ink. Marblehead, North Shore Drive, number 218, house with a green gate. Robert felt his heart stop. Marblehead. It was the place where his mother had lived when she was young, where he had spent a summer or two as a child. Later, Mary never spoke of that place again. She just mentioned that she had nothing left there, that all of that was in the past. But now, there it was, a handwritten address. Claire watched him from the laundry room doorway. She didn't say anything. She just waited. "I think I know where she is," Robert said softly. She nodded. "Go. Bring her back." Robert hesitated. He looked at Claire with a mixture of anger and compassion. "It's not that easy. I don't know if she wants to come back. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her that I need her." Robert didn't answer. He put the letter in his wallet. He went up to his room, packed a change of clothes and a sweater. On his way out, he passed the children's room. He heard Ethan talking in his sleep. "Granny, don't go." He closed his eyes. And then, without waiting for dawn, he got into the car. He started the engine and headed for Marblehead, to a house with a green gate, without knowing that behind that door, a truth he never imagined hearing awaited him. He walked slowly. He recognized some facades, although others had changed. A convenience store he remembered from childhood was now a coffee shop with metal tables. The drugstore where his mother bought ointments no longer existed. But the bells of the parish church were still there, marking time as they always had. When he arrived in front of the house, he stopped. The gate was just as he remembered it. green, peeling in places, with a rusty bell hanging from the frame. He knocked once, twice. There was no answer. He knocked again, this time harder. A few seconds later, footsteps were heard behind the door. "Who is it?" asked an old but firm woman's voice. "I'm looking for Mrs. Mary Helen Harrison," Robert said, swallowing. There was a long silence. Then the door cracked open, and a small woman with completely white hair braided back looked at him suspiciously. "And who are you?" "I'm her son," he replied, his voice breaking. The woman looked at him for a few more seconds, as if she were evaluating him from the inside. "You went years without visiting, didn't you?" Robert nodded, feeling he had no right to ask for anything. The woman opened the door all the way. "I'm Carol. Come in. Mary isn't home right now, but she'll be back in a few hours." Robert entered slowly. The house was humble but warm. It had plants in old pots, a wooden table, and a smell of incense and cloves that felt familiar. Carol led him to the kitchen and poured him some spiced coffee without saying anything more. He held the cup in his hands, not knowing how to begin. "Is my mum okay?" Carol looked at him for a long time before answering. "She's alive. She's strong. But she's not the same, Robert." He looked down. "I know I failed her." "You didn't just fail her," Carol corrected. "You left her alone. You turned her into a shadow. She arrived here as if she were dragging the world on her back. She wasn't eating well. She wasn't sleeping well. But even so, she smiled." Robert felt his stomach clench. "Did she tell you anything about us?" "Everything." Carol got up and went for a wooden box that was on top of a dresser. She placed it in front of him. "She didn't ask me to give this to you, but maybe it's time you know something else." Robert opened the box carefully. Inside were photographs, old letters, a rosary, and a piece of paper folded in four, with handwriting that wasn't his mother's. It was his father's handwriting. Carol watched him without saying a word. "Mary has kept that paper for years, but she has never read it completely. She's afraid of it. She says that if she does, she won't be able to keep pretending that she doesn't know what she knows." Robert felt a chill run down his spine. "What is it?" Carol took a deep breath. "It's a confession." He looked at her, his heart racing. "What kind?" "One that changes the way you see your own history." And just as Carol was about to continue, slow footsteps were heard in the patio, a cane hitting the ground, and a voice, soft but firm, that said, "Who is in my house?" Robert stood up abruptly. His heart now had completely stopped. Because after so many days, so many silences, so many unspoken words, his mother was there. The house no longer smelled of freshly cooked food, nor of sweet donuts in the afternoon, nor of warm pancakes in the morning. Only a faint scent of dampness remained, of accumulated dust in the corners, as if the days were stopping one over the other without anyone cleaning them up. Sophia had stopped playing. She no longer ran through the living room with her dolls or asked Granny to braid her hair. She stayed in her room, sitting on the floor, drawing in silence. Since Mary's disappearance, she had started filling sheets with dull colours. A house without sun, a table without anyone, an old woman standing in the street, alone, always alone. One of those afternoons, Claire found her asleep over the notebook. She opened it carefully and stopped when she saw an image that chilled her blood. Sophia had drawn her grandmother standing outside the house, looking inside through a window. On the other side of the glass were they, eating without looking at her. Claire closed the notebook without saying anything. That night, trying to tuck her in, Sophia asked in a soft voice, "Did Granny leave because she doesn't love us anymore?" Claire knelt beside the bed and stroked her hair. "No, sweetie. She left because she was tired. Tired of what? Claire swallowed. She didn't have a simple answer for that. Of everything. Sophia was silent for a moment, then whispered, I do love her, even though sometimes she didn't say it. The next day, Ethan also showed signs that the absence was starting to take its toll on him. He no longer answered school questions. He stopped tidying his toys. And when he came home with a dirty, torn shirt, he said no one at school helped him because his grandmother wasn't there to fix his clothes. She always sewed my buttons. Now no one does it, he said without looking at them, as he threw his backpack into a corner. Claire felt a lump in her throat. For the first time, her children were experiencing the real loss, not of someone who had died, but of someone who was still alive, but who no longer cared for them. Tell her you're sorry, Mum, Sophia said quite naturally. Tell her to come back. I already told her, Claire replied, looking down. But sometimes apologies come too late. What if we send her a drawing? Ethan asked. We don't know where she is, Claire said. Sophia thought for a moment and answered, But drawings fly. If I hang it in the window, maybe she'll see it from the sky or wherever she is. That same afternoon, she taped her drawing to the living room window glass. It was a simple scene. Mary sitting at the dining table with a smile on her face and a cup of hot cocoa in her hands. In front of her, Ethan, Sophia, Claire, and Robert, all with a flower in their hand. What is this? Robert asked when he arrived and saw the drawing in the window. It's the meal we owe her, Sophia said. Robert stood still for a moment. He stroked his daughter's hair and then went up to the room, where he kept the envelope Carol had given him with his father's letter. He still hadn't opened it. Something inside him resisted. But that day, he would. Meanwhile, Claire went to the utility room. It was just as Mary had left it. The bed made, the bedspread folded, the towels still in place. On the dresser was a small metal box with coloured threads. Inside, she found a pair of buttons sewn onto a piece of cloth. Ones very similar to the ones Ethan was always losing. She held it between her fingers. And there, alone, sitting on the edge of her mother-in-law's bed, Claire cried for the first time without pride, without anger. She cried for everything she hadn't said, for everything she had kept silent, and for everything that, perhaps, could no longer be repaired. At that moment, the neighbour, Mrs. Jones, knocked on the door. She carried a bag with bread from the store. How is Mrs. Mary? She asked when she saw Claire with swollen eyes. Claire didn't know what to say. She's not here. She left. She left? Where to? We don't know. Mrs. Jones looked down. I knew this was going to happen. She always looked sad. I heard her crying many times, but I didn't say anything. I thought it was just a phase. Sometimes I saw her talking to herself in the patio. She said she no longer fit in the house. Claire held on to the doorframe. She felt like the walls were closing in on her. Why didn't anyone tell me? Why does no one ask how the one who always serves is doing? Claire didn't answer. She just lowered her head. That night, Sophia's drawing flew away with the wind and ended up on the sidewalk. A child picked it up, folded it, and threw it in the trash without looking. But what Sophia didn't know, what no one imagined, was that Granny had seen it, although not with her eyes, but with something deeper. And just as night fell over the house, in Marblehead, Mary Helen had a premonition. She sat by the window, breathed deeply, and said softly, Something is changing, but I don't know if it's already too late. The sun was beginning to warm the cobblestones of the street, but inside Mary's house in Marblehead, the atmosphere remained tense, as if the emotional temperature would not allow calm to enter. Mary had remained standing on the threshold, with the cane in her hand, observing the man in her kitchen with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. "What are you doing here?" Robert felt his throat close up. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times during the drive. He had rehearsed words, apologies, phrases of comfort, but at that instant, none came out. "Mom, I came to find you," he managed to say. Mary looked away, not opening space for him to pass. "You didn't need to come," she replied in a dry but not aggressive tone. Carol, behind him, remained silent. It wasn't her place to intervene, but she was there in case Mary faltered. However, the woman in front of Robert was anything but weak. Her eyes were red, yes, and her voice tired, but her posture, her dignity, her decision to stand without lowering her head spoke for themselves. "I want to talk to you, explain things, listen to you if you let me," Robert insisted. "Now you want to listen to me?" Mary countered, looking down at the cane. "After years of not listening to me inside your own house?" Robert closed his eyes. There was no possible defense. "The kids are fine," he said. "Sophia draws you every day. Ethan doesn't want anyone to touch your things. Claire is changing. I want to change." Mary took a deep breath. She turned around and walked slowly toward the living room. She didn't tell him to leave, but she didn't invite him to sit down either. Robert followed her, and when she sat in her wicker chair by the window, he sat in a chair across from her. The sunlight entered obliquely, illuminating the deep wrinkles on her face. They weren't just wrinkles of age, but of years of swallowed silences. "Do you know the first time I felt invisible?" Mary suddenly asked, without looking at him. Robert slowly shook his head. "It was when Sophia was barely 3 years old. She was sick, and you and Claire went to the doctor. I stayed with her. I took care of her, lowered her fever with cool rags, made her some chicken broth. When you returned, Claire told me there was no need for so much drama, that it was just a cold. You didn't say anything. You just walked past." Robert swallowed. "I didn't realize, Mum." "No, you never realized. Not that time, nor the 100 times after." At that moment, someone knocked on the door. Carol got up to open it. It was a thin woman in a floral dress with her hair pulled back in a tight braid. She carried a bag with bread and a notebook in her arms. "Good morning. I'm sorry to bother you. Is Mrs. Mary here?" "Come in, Irene," Mary said from the living room. "Robert, this is Mrs. Irene. She lives around the corner." The woman entered with a nervous step, but when she saw Robert, she stopped. "You're her son?" "Yes, I'm Robert." Mrs. Irene looked at him for a moment, then turned to Mary. "I don't know if I should have come, but last night, I was thinking about everything you told me these past few days, and I couldn't keep quiet. I felt like I was part of the silence that made her leave." Mary looked at her sweetly. "You are not to blame for what I allowed, but you were a witness. And when you witness another woman's pain and do nothing, you become an accomplice." Robert frowned. "What are you talking about?" Irene sat down and opened the notebook. Inside were notes written by her. They were things Mary had told her little by little over the last few weeks, words Mary had never dared to say out loud in her house, but which, with Irene, in the tranquility of the patio, she had let go of like someone emptying a very heavy sack. "Your mother came to my house at 6 o'clock in the morning every Sunday. She helped me make biscuits, sometimes without having breakfast. She left before you woke up, so you wouldn't notice her absence. When I asked her why she did it, she told me, 'Because here, even if it's only for 2 hours, I feel useful. but in a different way, not as a servant, but as a person. Robert looked down. His chest burned. She told me she talked to herself in the room, Irene continued, that many nights she woke up crying, that it wasn't her body that hurt, but her soul. Mary closed her eyes. She didn't want her son to see her as a victim, but it was too late to stop what had already been said. One day I asked her why she didn't talk to you all. Do you know what she answered? Robert looked up, speechless. Because when I speak, they don't listen, and when I'm silent, they don't ask either. The silence became heavy. Carol crossed her arms in the corner. Mrs. Irene put away the notebook. I didn't come to make you feel guilty, young man, she said. But I did come to tell you that if you want your mother to come back home, it's not enough to ask for forgiveness. You have to do something more difficult. What? Repair. Mary stood up with difficulty. She walked to the patio door and looked outside. The afternoon light fell on the flower pots, on the clothesline, on the traces of a past that had returned in the form of a son. Are you afraid I won't come back? She asked without turning around. Very much, Robert replied, his voice breaking. Well, you should be more afraid if I come back and nothing changes, because that would be the worst betrayal, to return to where I was invisible, knowing that you were waiting for me, for the same thing. Robert felt his heart tighten. What his mother was saying was fair, necessary, painful. But there was something else he needed to understand, something Mary still wasn't saying, and that was kept in the letter written by his father. A letter Carol hadn't given him yet. A letter that would forever change the story he thought he knew. After the conversation with Mrs. Irene, Robert went out to the patio without saying a word. The sun had already set, and the air in Marblehead had that scent of both dampness and incense, as if the streets held secrets that refused to be forgotten. Mary did not speak again after he confessed his fear of losing her. Carol respected the silence. Irene said goodbye with a handshake that said more than any phrase. And Mary stayed in her usual corner, looking toward the horizon, her eyes dry, but full of history. That night, while everyone slept, Robert couldn't fall asleep. He stayed lying on the cot Carol offered him in the guest room, going over every word, every image, every gesture of his mother's. He didn't know if she would forgive him, but he sensed that there was still something more buried in the past, something that even Mary didn't dare to say out loud. At 3 o'clock in the morning, as if an impulse pushed him, Robert got up. He walked silently through the house and went out to the patio, where some clothes from the day before were still hanging to dry. The old washing machine was covered with a blanket, and next to it, a bucket with clothespins. Then he remembered something he had read in his mother's letters, something she mentioned almost as a whisper between the lines. I kept the most difficult thing in a corner where no one looks, where everything is hidden under soap and rags. The laundry sink is the only one that has heard my complete truth. Robert knelt down and began to search the space behind the sink, carefully moving objects. Bottles of bleach, used soaps, a plastic box with old rags. And there, between the cracks in the wall and a piece of rotten wood, he found a sealed envelope, yellowed by time, with his name written by hand. Robert, it simply said. He held it for a few seconds. His heart pounded in his temples. He returned to his room, turned on the dim bedside lamp, and with trembling hands opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet, folded precisely. It wasn't modern paper. It was written in black ballpoint pen, in his mother's same firm handwriting. Robert took a deep breath and read. Son, if you are reading this, it is because something hurt you. And if something hurt you, Perhaps now you can understand a little of the pain I held on to for so many years. This is not a letter to reclaim you. It is to confess to you. Not my mistakes, but my silences. I always believed that protecting you was staying quiet, that giving you stability was giving up my words, my opinions, my place. But I was wrong. I raised you alone. You know that. But what you never knew was that before being your mother, I was a woman who dreamed of being loved, who dreamed of a family where I wouldn't be used, where I wouldn't be silenced. Your father was not the man I told you about. He was harsh, cold, unfaithful. He didn't die as soon as I said. He left. He abandoned us. And I swallowed that shame so that you wouldn't carry his abandonment like a cross. And over the years, when I thought I had overcome everything, you arrived, Robert. A son I loved more than my own life. But you also were, unintentionally, the one who taught me that the cruelest oblivion is not that of a stranger, but that of the one you love the most. You became a man, a husband, a father, and you stopped seeing me as a woman, as a mother, as a person, and I stopped demanding that you do so. Every dish I washed, every shirt I ironed, every time I went hungry so your children could eat first, was a way of continuing to talk to you, even though you no longer listened. And when I heard Claire say that what I did was an obligation, something inside me broke forever. Because there is no worse pain than serving out of love, and having that love be invisible. I didn't leave out of revenge. I left because I understood that if I didn't, I would extinguish inside without anyone noticing. I don't ask you to look for me, nor to forgive me. I only ask you to never again allow anyone in your life, not your wife, not your children, not yourself, to become shadows. Mary Helen, your mother, the woman who is still waiting to be seen. Robert took several minutes to let go of the sheet. His eyes were soaked, his chest tight, and the words were stuck like thorns in his flesh. For the first time, he understood everything, every gesture, every silence, every tired look from his mother. He sat on the edge of the cot, trembling, and knew that he could no longer return to New York without doing something more. It wasn't enough to be there. It wasn't enough to listen. He had to respond, and not with words, but with an action that would change everything. He got up before the sun was visible, with the letter in his pocket, and walked to the town church. He entered without speaking to anyone, sat in the last pew, and for the first time in many years, he prayed. He didn't ask for miracles, nor forgiveness. He only asked for clarity. And at that moment, a familiar figure entered through the side door. Father John. With a grave expression, he signaled for him to approach. He held a sealed envelope with old wax in his hands. "Your mother never wanted to read this," the priest said. "But I think you should." "What is it?" "A letter your father left before he left. A truth Mary has kept for decades, and one you are about to discover." Robert took the envelope, not knowing that by opening it, he would not only change his mother's history, but his own as well. Robert held the envelope with both hands, as if carrying something that could burn his fingers. It was thicker than his mother's letter, and the wax sealing it seemed intact, as if time had not wanted to touch its contents. Father John said nothing more. He placed a hand on his shoulder, silently wished him courage, and walked away down the church aisle, leaving behind the echo of his footsteps. Robert went outside, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't want to open the letter in the street. He felt he couldn't do it halfway, like someone glancing at a paper without understanding what it means. He had to read it in a place that made sense. And he knew clearly, he had to return to where it all began. He walked for almost half an hour, the letter tucked into the inside pocket of his jacket. The cobblestone streets of Marblehead awakened memories he hadn't known he kept until that moment. The tall trees, the colourful walls of the houses, the altars with candles on the corners, all spoke to him of his childhood, of that brief time he shared with his mother in that town before she sold everything and moved with him to New York. He arrived in front of the old house where they lived together for a couple of years. It was no longer theirs. It now had a different colour, a different fence, and a "For Rent" sign was visible at the entrance. But the apple tree on the sidewalk was still there. He sat down on the curb, right in front of the trunk, just as he did as a child, while his mother hung clothes in the patio. He took out the letter and carefully broke the seal. The first lines were written in a handwriting he didn't recognize. It wasn't Mary's, nor his own. It was the handwriting of a man he thought he had forgotten. He began to read. "Mary, if you ever decide to open this, I know years will have passed. And if you are reading this, Robert, then my truth comes to you late, but better that than never. I was never brave. When I had to face my mistakes, I left. Not because I was a coward, but because I was selfish. I thought disappearing was better than staying to watch everything I broke. But today I want to write what I never had the face to say out loud." Robert swallowed. He continued reading, his fingers tense on the paper. "You grew up believing that I was your father, that Mary and I were a couple like any other, and that our story was just one among many. But we weren't, because you were not born of me. Your mother found you. She found you, Robert. You were only a few days old. You were wrapped in an old blanket, left in front of the door of a parish in the mountains where she cleaned floors and helped in the kitchen. Someone abandoned you, but she didn't." Robert dropped the letter onto his legs. The world fell silent. He looked at the paper, incredulous. He reread the previous lines to make sure he hadn't imagined them. But there it was. His mother was not his biological mother. She had picked him up. She had raised him. She had given him her name, her love, her history. He felt the air leave his lungs. He leaned his back against the trunk of the tree and closed his eyes. The past was crumbling. Everything he thought he knew about himself was now cracking like an old wall. He gathered his strength. He continued reading. "I didn't accept it at first. It was hard for me to see you as mine. I was young, clumsy, frustrated, and it hurt Mary. But she never treated you differently. She defended you fiercely, cared for you tenderly. And with time, I loved you too. But that love turned into fear, because I was afraid that one day you would discover you weren't mine, and that you would hate us both. When you moved to New York with your mother, and she sold this house for you, I knew that everything she did was love, true love, the kind that is not shouted, the kind that is demonstrated. That's why, if you ever get to read this, I just want you to know one thing. You were not born from her womb, Robert, but you were born from her heart, and that is worth more than any blood tie. Forgive her if she ever made a mistake, but above all, look at her as what she is, the only person who never abandoned you." Robert couldn't breathe. The words tore him apart inside. He wanted to shout, to cry, to run, but his legs were stiff, rooted to the ground like roots. He felt that the child he had been, the man he was, and the son he never knew how to be, were confronting each other at that instant, all at once. Suddenly a shadow approached from the sidewalk. A small figure, walking slowly with a cane in her hand and a scarf wrapped around her neck. Mary. Robert looked up and saw her, as if destiny had decided to give him the exact opportunity. She looked at him, without surprise, as if she had known she would find him there. "What are you doing in this place?" she asked, her voice calm. Robert didn't answer. He just held out the letter to her with trembling hands. She took it. She looked at it for a moment, without opening it. "Did you read it?" "Yes." "And how did you feel?" Robert wiped his face. "Shame, guilt, and also love. A lot of love for you." Mary sat down next to him, on the same curb where, years ago, they sat together peeling apples. "I didn't want you to find out this way," she said, looking at the ground. "I didn't know I needed to know it either. But now, everything makes sense." They remained silent for a long time, without hurry, without anger, just the weight of the past between them, until Mary broke the silence. "I picked you up because I couldn't leave you there. It was night. It was cold. You were crying as if the world was ending. And I don't know. I felt you were mine, that you always had been." Robert leaned toward her, not with words, not with speeches. He just took her hand, and for the first time since he was a child, he held it tightly. But the moment didn't last long, because from the end of the street, a figure began to advance with a firm step. It was Claire, and she was carrying something in her hand, an envelope, and a decision that could change everything. Claire walked down the cobblestone street of Marblehead with a firm step, but a tight chest. She didn't know if she was more afraid of not finding Mary or of finding her. The envelope in her hand trembled as much as her knees, and every time her eyes fixed on a house number, her heart beat faster. She had thought about it all night. She had written and rewritten that letter more than 10 times. But what she carried wasn't just paper. It was what she hadn't known how to say, what she had kept silent out of arrogance, pride, or ignorance. And there, right in front of her, they were, the stone curb, the apple tree, and the two of them sitting in silence. Mary and Robert, her husband and her mother-in-law. Mother and son, one crying in silence, the other with a calm but tense face, as if she knew that peace had an expiration date. Mary was the first to see her. She didn't get up. She didn't say her name. She just watched her with narrowed eyes, gauging her step, her attitude, her intention. Robert saw her too. He stood up, his eyes still red. "She came alone," he said, as if that were important. Mary didn't respond. Claire stopped less than 3 feet away. She held the envelope with both hands. "I came because I don't know if there's any other way to do this, but if I keep quiet again, I will regret it." Robert took a step back, leaving them face to face. "I'm not here to ask you to come back," Claire said. "I'm here to tell you that I understand if you no longer want to." The phrase, said in a trembling but clear voice, took all 3 of them by surprise. "I didn't know how to see what you were doing for me, for my children, for our home, and when I saw you, I only saw you as a nuisance, because that's what I was taught to think about mothers-in-law, as if your presence was a threat, when in reality you were the only true pillar that house had." Mary looked at her without blinking. Claire lowered her gaze. "I have no way to repair the years I ignored you, nor the words I let slip without thinking, but I do have something I never gave you: gratitude and respect." She held out the envelope. "I wrote it by hand. It's not pretty, but it's sincere." Mary took the envelope, looked at it, and put it in her cardigan pocket. "And the children?" she asked in a low voice. "Sophia sits at the window every day waiting for you. Ethan keeps your towels so we don't wash them, because he says they still smell like you." For the first time, Mary's voice broke. I don't want to go back to a house where I'm served with guilt. If I return, I want to do it with dignity. I don't want you to serve, Claire said. I want you to be there, with us, not for us. At that moment, Carol came out the door, hands on her hips, as always when something made her uncomfortable. Have you said everything you needed to say? Or do you want to keep freezing out here? Claire smiled weakly. I said what I came to say. Then come in. The coffee is hot, and if no one drinks it, it turns bitter. Mary stood up with the help of her cane. She didn't look at Claire with tenderness, nor with anger, just with a serenity she had cultivated in silence for a long time. The three of them entered the house, with Robert closing the door behind them. Carol's dining room was small, but full of life. Plants on the windowsill, a round wooden table, and hand-stitched floral curtains. On the table, an earthenware pitcher and 3 steaming cups. Claire sat down and wasn't sure whether to take the cup. Mary took hers first and took a sip. Do you remember the first time you asked me not to speak in front of the children? She asked suddenly. Claire nodded with shame. I did it because I felt you were taking away my authority. And now? Now I know that I was taking away the most valuable example they had in the house. Mary said nothing. She just closed her eyes for a few seconds. I thought you were weak, Claire added, almost in a whisper. But you were strong. They just taught you not to shout your strength. The silence was long, until Carol, fed up with so much restraint, stood up suddenly. Well, if you've said what you needed to say, I'm going to prepare something to eat, because no one cries on an empty stomach here, and she headed to the kitchen. Mary remained seated across from Claire, the cup in her hands. I haven't decided if I'm going to return, and you don't have to decide now. But if I do, Mary added, it will be with conditions, because I don't plan to return to the corner I left. Claire nodded. And I'm going to help make sure that doesn't happen again. At that moment, Robert entered with his cell phone in his hand. Sophia sent me a message, he said, with a broken smile. She says she dreamed that you came back, and this time you sat at the table with everyone. Mary looked away. She wiped away a tear before it fell. I always arrived late at the table, she whispered, always serving others first. This time, Robert said, we'll wait for you. But before deciding if she would return, Mary needed something more, because she still hadn't confronted the last person in her story, nor read the letter Carol had hidden from her for years. A letter that didn't come from her son, nor her husband, but from someone else. Someone who had been present in her life, without her knowing it. The night had fallen with a soft breeze in Marblehead. The lights of the street lamps flickered timidly on the cobblestone corners, and an unmistakable aroma wafted from Carol's house. Cinnamon and clove tea, the same one Mary prepared whenever she needed to calm her soul. The three of them were sitting in the kitchen, Mary, Carol, and Claire. The conversation had quieted for a few minutes, as if the air needed to rest from so much emotional weight. Robert had gone out to walk the town streets, trying to process the truth he had discovered hours earlier. He was not Mary's biological son. But that, far from distancing him from her, had brought him even closer. Because in his words, in his actions, in every tear he had seen fall from her eyes in recent days, was the kind of love that is not born of blood, but of something much stronger, the will to love. Are you hungry? Carol asked, breaking the silence as she stirred the pot of tea. Not much, Mary replied, but I'll take a slice of bread if there's any left. Claire got up without saying anything, went to the cupboard, and took out a sweet sesame roll. She placed it in front of her mother-in-law, carefully, like someone offering something sacred. Thank you, Mary said, her voice serene. Claire sat back down, lowering her gaze. Her hands were clasped on the table, and occasionally she played with her wedding ring, turning it slowly. Can I ask you a question? She blurted out, without looking at her. Mary nodded. Did you ever feel that Robert wasn't yours? Carol slowly turned her face toward them, but didn't say anything. She just took a sip from her cup. Yes, Mary replied without hesitation. Many times, especially when he was a child. There was something in his gaze that didn't come from me, a sadness that had no explanation. But I never told him. And why did you raise him as if he were? Claire asked, her voice sincere. Mary looked up and stared directly into her eyes. Because he didn't need to be mine to love him. I loved him from the first day, even if I didn't know why he cried so much. Even if sometimes he looked at me with fear, as if even that young he understood what it is to be abandoned. Claire blinked slowly. Her eyes were wet. And you never thought about telling him? I thought about it many times, especially when he grew up, when he became a man. But I always chose to stay silent. I was afraid that, knowing it, he would distance himself, that he would look at me as the woman who lied to him. But it wasn't a lie, Mary, Carol said softly. It was an act of love. Mary sighed. Yes, but it was also an omission. Sometimes protecting too much is also a form of betrayal. I don't know if I did right or wrong. I only know that I did it with all my heart. He was still honoring you. Claire let a tear fall onto her hand, but didn't wipe it away. I did betray, she said. You, my children, myself. I wanted to build a house just for me, without understanding that there was already one before me, a woman who held everything together in silence, who deserved an altar, not a corner. Mary said nothing. She just drank from her cup calmly. Her eyes were fixed on the candle lit on the table. Claire continued. I know there are things that cannot be erased, but if you decide to come back, I want you to come back as a queen, not as a servant. I want your grandchildren to see you eat before you serve, to hear you before you speak softly, to learn from you what I couldn't teach them. Mary closed her eyes for an instant. Carol, from the back, smiled slightly. Do you remember when you helped me with my first birth, Mary? Carol asked. Of course. You were screaming as if your soul were being torn out, she said with a slight chuckle. And you told me, relax. What hurts is what's worthwhile. I won't forget it. And now look at us. Here we are, giving birth again, but not to children, but to truths. The three of them laughed. A little. Just enough. As if to release the tension remaining in the air. I have something for you, Carol suddenly said, standing up. She went to her room and returned with a wooden box in her hands. She placed it in front of Mary. This was left by someone who came looking for you a few years ago. They didn't dare to see you, but they asked me to give it to you if you ever came back. Mary frowned. Who? They didn't say their name. They only left this, and a phrase. Tell her I haven't forgotten what she did. Mary swallowed. She opened the box carefully. Inside was an embroidered handkerchief with the initials J.M.U., an old photograph with the face of a pregnant young woman, and a handwritten note that said, You know why. Mary turned pale. The teacup trembled in her fingers. Are you okay? Claire asked, alarmed. But Mary didn't answer. Because at that moment, she remembered something that had been buried for decades. A rainy night, a favor done in secret, a decision that changed two lives without anyone knowing. And she understood that "you know why" was not just a warning. It was a debt that was about to return. As soon as Mary saw the embroidered handkerchief with the initials JMU, she knew that something inside her would not emerge unscathed that night. Her face changed. She was no longer the grandmother who cried in silence in the laundry room, nor the woman who served chili for years without sitting at the table. Nor was she the mother who had been humiliated by a blind daughter-in-law or ignored by a busy son. In that moment, she was the Mary of the past, the one who carried guilt that no one else knew. Claire and Carol remained silent, watching her with concern. Mary took the photo in her hands. It was an image from decades ago, in black and white, of a young pregnant woman sitting in front of a church. She didn't recognize the face, but the gesture, the gaze, the aura felt painfully familiar. "What does this mean?" Carol asked softly. Mary didn't answer. She stood up slowly, her cane trembling between her fingers. She walked toward the patio door and stood there, looking at the dark, star-filled sky. Claire approached cautiously. "Who is it, Mary?" "I don't know," she replied. "But I know it comes from the past I always wanted to leave buried." The words were not a mystery to her. They were an echo, one that had been resonating in her mind for years, but which she had learned to silence. "A long time ago, when I was barely 20 years old, I worked cleaning a parish in the downtown area," she began, her voice low but firm. "Father John was not a pastor. He was barely a seminarian. I was poor, newly arrived from the countryside, without an education, without family, and I clung to that job like someone clinging to a life raft." Carol and Claire exchanged a fleeting glance. Mary continued. "One day while sweeping the atrium, I found a girl crying. She was pregnant, young. She had bruises on her arms and a torn dress. She looked at me as if I was the only person in the world willing to listen to her." Mary fell silent for a moment. Then she sat down again, more from the weight of memory than the fatigue of her body. "She asked me to help her. She told me her parents had kicked her out of the house, that the man who got her pregnant had beaten her and disappeared, that she had nowhere to go. I hid her for weeks in an empty room at the convent, in secret. I brought her food, I washed her clothes, I kept her company. I promised her she wasn't alone." Claire swallowed. "And what happened to her?" "One morning, she gave birth. Without doctors, without help, just me there. It was terrible. I didn't know what to do. The baby was born healthy, but she was very weak. She was bleeding non-stop. She died in my arms, without telling me her name." "And the baby?" Carol asked. "The baby was left at the church, in a basket, with a note that said, 'Take care of him. He has no one else.'" Mary lowered her head. "That boy was Robert." Claire covered her mouth. Carol let out a sigh that seemed to have been waiting for years to escape. You knew from the start he wasn't yours." "Yes, but the world doesn't have space for poor women raising other people's children. So I lied. I said he was mine. I left the convent. I looked for jobs where no one asked too many questions. I invented a story, and I carried it as if it were real." "And Father John?" Claire asked. "He knew. He helped me. He protected me. And he swore to keep silent. He gave me a letter from the parish archives, written by the young woman weeks before she died. I never dared to read it. I hid it. And now everything comes back." Carol got up without saying anything and returned minutes later with an old envelope, sealed with yellow tape. "Is this it? Really?" Mary took it with both hands. The envelope was brittle from time. On the lower corner were written the initials E.M.Y., the same as on the handkerchief, and a date, September of 1981. "Read it," Claire said. "It's time." Mary nodded. She carefully peeled off the tape. She took out a thin sheet with faded blue ink. Her hands trembled. She began to read softly. "If anyone finds this letter, please, deliver it to the woman who helped me, the one who saved me from abandonment. I don't know her name, but she gave me warmth when I needed it most. My name is Mariana Vance. If something happens to me, I want my son not to be given to Child Protective Services. I want him to grow up with someone who knows what it is to survive in this world. If this letter reaches your hands, Mom, I beg you, raise him. Love him. Don't tell him I abandoned him. Tell him I gave him up so he could have a future." Mary dropped the letter onto the table. "Mariana Vance," she murmured. "I never knew her name." "She trusted you," Carol said, her eyes teary. "And you delivered?" "And now what?" Claire asked. Mary fell silent. Then she stood up. "Now I need to find someone else." "Who?" Mary looked at her intently. "Father John, because he knew everything, and he still holds something he hasn't told me." And the next day, as the sun rose over the mountains, Mary walked alone to the parish church where everything had begun. What she didn't imagine was that upon arriving there, she would find an even older truth, one that had been buried by the priest himself to protect someone else. As Mary slowly crossed the side gate of the parish church, the same one she had crossed so many times in her youth, carrying buckets of water or bags of dirty laundry, an old sensation ran down her spine. The air inside was not just cooler. It was laden with a presence that didn't come from the stained glass or the wooden pews, but from memory. That memory that, even if you try to bury it under years of silence, always finds a way to speak. Father John was not in the sacristy. A young nun told her he had gone out to visit a family in the neighborhood. She offered for Mary to wait for him, but Mary shook her head. It wasn't the moment. Not yet. She needed to be alone in that space. She sat in the next to last pew, closed her eyes, and for the first time since she arrived in Marblehead, she allowed her body to soften, as if the earth was finally holding her without demanding anything in return. But while she sought answers in her past, 30 miles away, in New York City, a child tossed and turned under the blankets. Ethan. He had been restless all day. Since Claire returned from Marblehead, something in him had changed. It wasn't just the silence, nor the dull drawings, nor the questions floating in the air about his grandmother. It was something else. Something he didn't know how to say, but felt every time he closed his eyes. "Daddy," he said that night, before sleeping. "I dreamed Granny gave me something." Robert approached his bed. He stroked his hair. "What did she give you?" "I don't know. It was a box, but it was closed. She told me not to open it until she was ready." "Did she say anything else?" "She just hugged me and told me I was different." Robert felt a lump in his throat. "Different how?" Ethan thought for a few seconds. "That I have something of hers, even though I don't have her blood." Robert was speechless. The boy didn't know anything, not about the letter, not about the secret, not about everything that had erupted in those days. But somehow he sensed it. "Are we going to see her soon?" he asked in a low voice. "Yes," Robert replied, trying to sound firm. "Very soon." "And is she coming back?" Robert kissed his forehead. "That depends on all of us." Ethan nodded, and before closing his eyes, he added, I want her to teach me how to make her rice, the one that smells so good from the entryway. While the boy slept, Robert went to the utility room. He opened the box where Mary kept her handwritten recipes. The letters were firm, round, but some had smudges from water or grease. On the back of a folded sheet, he found a note, for Ethan and Sophia. If you ever miss me, make this rice. If it turns out bad, it doesn't matter. The important thing is that you make it together. He smiled through tears. Mary was still taking care of them, in her own way. The next morning, in Marblehead, Mary returned to the parish church. This time, Father John was there. Sitting on a pew next to the altar, his face older than she remembered, but with the same serene gaze. I knew you would come back, he said, without surprise. Do you have something else? She asked directly. I saw it in your eyes when you gave me the young man's letter. The priest looked down. He took a breath. Yes, tell me. I hid it, Gemfipapisats, because I thought you couldn't bear it. I've survived too many things, John. Don't protect me anymore. Don't take away the little that belongs to me. Father John stood up. He walked toward the sacristy. He returned with a small wooden box. This is not only yours, Mary. It is also his. She didn't understand. Whose? John handed her the box. Robert's. Mary opened the lid. Inside was a second letter, not written by the father, nor by the husband, nor by Mariana Vance. It was a letter in a child's handwriting, signed with two names she didn't expect to find. For my mum, and for the woman who saved my mum. A letter written by Mariana Vance's sister. And inside it, a revelation Mary never imagined. One that would cast doubt not only on her past, but also on the origin of everything she had built. In New York, the house was still standing, but it was no longer a home. Despite Robert's recent visit to Marblehead and Sophia's promise to make rice every time she missed her grandmother, the atmosphere was heavy, as if the walls held lamentations, as if the everyday objects, the glasses, the towels, the blender, knew that the woman who brought order to the chaos was gone, and they didn't know when she would return. Claire paced back and forth, holding the same to-do list for 3 days. The washing machine was broken. Ethan had a dentist appointment. Sophia had a festival at school and needed a clean uniform. Robert's shirts were piled up, unironed, and no one, absolutely no one, knew what to cook. It wasn't the number of chores that exhausted her. It was the constant presence of the absence. She opened the refrigerator and closed it without taking anything. Then she opened it again, out of habit. Inside, the broth she had tried to make looked grey, tasteless. She smelled it, left it. She went to the stove, lit the burner, and let out a huff when she couldn't find the salt. Where did you leave the salt, Mary? She murmured, as if she could still hear her. Sophia entered the kitchen with her drawing notebook. Mum, I need help with my homework. I can't right now, honey, I'm busy, Claire replied, even though she wasn't doing anything at that moment. But it's just one question. I told you I can't, she repeated more firmly. Sophia fell silent. Her eyes welled up. She walked slowly to the living room, hugging her notebook to her chest. Claire watched her for a few seconds and felt a pang. She was no longer the cold woman from before. The pride that used to sustain her was cracking. And inside, nothing solid remained. Night came quickly. Robert still hadn't returned from Marblehead. The children went to bed early, barely speaking. Claire remained sitting alone in the dining room, holding a cup of unsweetened tea. The clock struck 11 o'clock when the first symptoms began. Dizziness, A pang in her chest. Chills. She got up to look for a blanket, but her legs didn't respond well. She tripped over the corner of the rug and fell to her knees. She stayed there for a few seconds, trying to regain her balance, but her body folded uncontrollably. "Mary," she whispered without thinking. It was the first time in her life she had called her without contempt, like a call to the heart, a cry from the depths of her fragility. The sound woke Ethan, who came down with clumsy steps. Seeing her on the floor, he ran to her. "Mom, are you okay?" "I'm just tired." "You look pale. Help me sit down." The boy, with his weak but determined strength, supported her by the shoulders. He helped her up and led her to the couch. Claire sank into it and closed her eyes. "Don't tell your sister, okay? I don't want her to worry." Ethan nodded. Then he brought her a glass of water, which Claire drank slowly. "Do you think Granny will forgive me someday?" she asked suddenly. "I think so, because you changed." "You think I changed?" "Yes. You don't yell as much as you used to, and you cook even if it tastes bad." Claire let out a weak but sincere laugh. "What if she doesn't come back?" Ethan looked down. "Even if she doesn't come back, you're already different. And so am I." They spent the night like that, sitting in silence under the faint light of the dining room lamp. The next morning, Claire got up more slowly than usual. She showered, prepared breakfast as best she could, and walked to the utility room. She went in. The room was the same. The crooked crucifix, the folded bedspread, the empty drawers. But this time, Claire sat on the bed and didn't feel like an intruder. She felt, finally, in debt. She opened the lowest drawer. She wasn't looking for anything. She just wanted to understand. And there, at the bottom, she found a small glass jar with a metal lid. Inside, scraps of fabric with embroidered names. One said Sophia, another Ethan, and another Claire. Tears welled up without permission. Mary had embroidered her name, despite everything. She left the room with the jar in her hands, placed it in the center of the table, and took a deep breath. This house is no longer going to wait. This house is going to prepare. And she made a decision. She wasn't going to sit around begging for forgiveness. She was going to go get Mary. But not as a daughter-in-law. She was going to go as a woman, as a daughter of life, as someone who, finally, was ready to look at Mary not as a shadow, but as the root of everything that had once held them up. That afternoon in Marblehead, while Mary walked back from the parish church with the wooden box against her chest, Robert had already returned to New York. He didn't want to explain himself to his mother when he said goodbye that morning. He just told her he had something pending that couldn't wait any longer. And it was true. Because that same morning, in Mary's empty room, while Claire prepared a simple rice dish for the children, Robert returned silently to that space that no longer smelled of soap or cinnamon. To that corner of the house that used to seem unimportant to anyone, and that now felt like the absent heart of the home. He sat on the bed and ran his hand over the bedspread. As he did so, he noticed a strange fold in the seam of the edge. Curious, he carefully lifted the mattress. Hidden underneath, well concealed, he found an old hardback notebook, covered with faded floral contact paper. He opened it. The first page had written in blue ink, "Mary Helen Harrison, for my hands, for my memories, and for when I no longer dare to speak." Robert leaned against the headboard, the notebook open on his lap. He didn't know what he was going to find, but he sensed that this was not just any diary. It was an archive of pain, an emotional testament, a decades-long contained scream that finally was ready to be read. He turned the page, and began to read. The day I realized I wasn't going to be happy with my husband was the same day I knew I had run out of options. I was 20 years old, a son who wasn't mine, and a last name that didn't protect me. I married out of necessity, not love. And he, soon after, treated me the way you treat things you have without effort, with neglect. The handwriting was clear, round, but in certain paragraphs it trembled. There were water stains on some corners. Robert didn't know if they were tears or dampness, but his stomach clenched. He continued reading. I never told anyone that he pushed me, that he took away the money for food to spend on drinks, that he called me useless, that he told me he was doing me a favor by letting me stay in his house, that sometimes he forced me to do things I didn't want to. I never told anyone because, if I did, I was afraid they would take Robert away from me. And that boy was the only good thing I had left. Robert felt his breath hitch. When he finally left, I felt free, but also broken. I didn't know how to raise a child alone, but I also didn't know how to trust again. I swore to myself that I would never fall in love again, and I kept that promise. I never gave my heart to anyone else. I only lent it a little, to my grandchildren. He turned several pages. All contained fragments of a story Robert was unaware of. Mary recounted how she sold her first set of earrings to buy him new shoes when he started junior high. How she cried in the bathroom when she heard him tell a friend she was kind of weird. How she went without dinner many nights so Claire wouldn't feel invaded. And then, on a different, more recent page, in black ink, he found a new title, The Day I Stopped Existing in My Own House. Robert knew what was coming. It was after the third time Claire told me it was my obligation to do everything, that I didn't contribute, that I just ate and was in the way. I didn't hate her. I never did. But that day, I understood that I no longer existed there as a person, only as another piece of furniture, and no one misses a piece of furniture when it breaks. Robert closed the notebook with trembling hands. He rested it on his lap. He rubbed his face. He couldn't believe what he had ignored for so many years. Mary had screamed all of that through her silence, through her gestures, through her lowered gaze and stooped back, through the hot soup and the ironed shirts, through the way she cared for Sophia when she had a fever or sewed Ethan's buttons without being asked. And he never listened. Claire appeared at the room doorway, drying her hands with a cloth. Are you okay? She asked softly. Robert looked at her. His eyes were red. I found this. She took a step forward. She saw the notebook on the bed. Did you read it all? I don't need to. I read enough to understand that we hurt her more than we thought. Claire looked down. Do you know what hurt me the most to read? He continued. That she never felt completely loved. That she did everything for me, for you all. And that she didn't even feel like a real part of this family. Claire walked closer. She sat next to him. So what do we do now? Robert took a deep breath. We go get her, but not to beg. We go to tell her that there's space for her now, not just in the house, but in our lives, as she deserves, as we never should have denied her. Claire nodded, and for the first time, without fear, she rested her head on her husband's shoulder. What if she doesn't want to come back? Robert didn't answer right away. Then, even if she doesn't come back, we'll show her that we are no longer the same people who let her go. And that same afternoon, Sophia ran in with a sheet of paper in her hand. Daddy, Mummy, look what I drew. It was a portrait of Mary, but not cooking, not cleaning, not serving. It was Mary sitting on the couch, laughing, with a book in her hands. And at the bottom of the drawing, Sophia had written, "This is how I want to see my granny." happy. Robert took the drawing. He folded it carefully. He put it in the notebook and decided that this would be the first gift he would give her when they found her. But he didn't know that at that very moment, on a bench in front of the Marblehead Church, Mary was holding a box that wasn't hers, but from a woman who claimed to be Mariana Vance's true sister, and who came with a truth that would challenge everything Mary thought she knew, even about Robert. That afternoon, as the sun set behind the mountains and New York City turned orange and dusty, Sophia sat by the dining room window. She had a white sheet of paper in front of her, several crayons scattered on the table, and a fixed idea in her mind: to make her grandmother come back. Not because someone had told her to, not because Mum or Dad had asked her to draw something nice to distract herself, but because Sophia felt that the only way to heal all the silence floating in the house was to say what no one was saying. And since she didn't know how to talk about it, she decided to write it. In her own way, with her own words, with her drawings. She started by drawing her granny wearing her apron, as she remembered her in the kitchen. Then she drew her on the armchair, with a cup of tea and a cat on her lap. Even though they never had one, she said that as a child, Mary always dreamed of having a plump white one. Then she wrote her letter in a child's handwriting. Dear Granny, I don't know if you are mad or if you are just sad, but I want you to know that I miss you very much. I don't like Mum's soup anymore. It tastes weird. And Daddy doesn't sing anymore when he washes the dishes. I braid my doll's hair the way you taught me, but it's not the same. The house smells like dust, not coffee, and I fall asleep with the blanket you folded, but now it feels cold. I love you very much. I don't know what we did, but I promise I won't do it again. If you come back, I'll let you have my pillow and you can sleep in my bed. Love, Sophia. When she finished writing it, she drew a heart with a red marker and then went to the drawer where Mary kept her recipes. She opened it slowly, as if afraid a memory might scold her. She left her letter there, between the recipe for banana pudding and a napkin embroidered with the letter M. She didn't tell anyone. She just returned to her room, lay down, looking at the ceiling, and hoped that somehow Granny would know. The next day, Mary woke up with a different weight on her chest. It wasn't pain or anguish. It was a premonition, as if someone from afar had gently touched her shoulder. I dreamed about Sophia, she told Carol while they had coffee. She was talking to me, but not with words. It was like she was writing to me from far away. Carol smiled. Well, maybe she did. Do you think children feel more? I think children see where adults are blind. They hear what no one says. She always saw me, even when others didn't. Carol placed her cup on the earthenware saucer. And what did she tell you? That the house no longer smells like coffee? Carol laughed softly. Then it's time for you to decide if you're going to leave it smelling like dust, or if you're going to fill it with your own essence again. Mary remained silent. That afternoon, while Robert returned from a trip to the store, he found Sophia sitting on the hallway floor. She was drawing again. What are you doing, honey? A house. And who lives there? You, Mum, Ethan, me, and Granny. Robert knelt down and hugged her from behind. And what is Granny doing in that drawing? She's smiling, because she finally feels like she belongs. Robert looked at her and felt a pang in his chest. He went to the utility room, looking for something to store some papers, and when he opened the recipe drawer, he saw it. The letter, with the red heart. He read every word, slowly. He cried. Not from sadness, but from something new, something bigger than repentance, recognition. He took it to the room. He showed it to Claire. She covered her mouth when she read it. Then they passed it to Ethan, who asked if they could send her a letter too. How? Robert said. I don't know, but I want to tell her that I miss her when I brush my teeth, because she always brushed them better than anyone. And then Claire proposed something. Let's fill that box, each of us with a letter, and when she's ready, we'll give them to her. What if she doesn't come back? Ethan asked. Then we'll show her that we are no longer the same people who let her go. That night, the three of them wrote, with tears, with drawings, with clumsy but real phrases. And in Marblehead, that same night, Carol entered Mary's room with a box in her hands. This arrived today. Someone left it at the door. They didn't want to say their name. Mary opened the lid. Inside, a napkin, a drawing, a letter with Sophia's name written in crayon, and at the bottom, another letter. One that wasn't written by any of the children, one that bore his name, in black ink, with the handwriting she knew best in the world. It was Robert's handwriting, and what that letter said would change the decision she thought she had already made. Mary opened the letter with trembling hands. Robert's handwriting was the same she had seen in hasty notes stuck to the refrigerator, on grocery lists written on the back of old envelopes, on school report cards signed out of obligation. But this letter wasn't one of those. It was long, written in black ink. The paper was a little wrinkled, as if Robert had read it over and over before deciding to send it. Mary sat on the wicker armchair in the living room. Carol was nearby, but didn't interrupt. She merely observed her in silence, like someone preparing for an emotional fire, because she knew that what was coming wasn't just anything. Mary read, Mum, if you are reading this, it is because your granddaughter did what I should have done a long time ago. See you. Not see you when you cooked, or when you washed, or when you prepared breakfast before anyone else. I mean really see you. See your tiredness, your loneliness, your silence. Mary took a deep breath. Her eyes began to fill with tears, but she didn't look away from the paper. I failed you many times, and the saddest thing is that I got used to failing you as if it were normal, because I grew up believing that mothers don't need to be seen, just to serve. But now I understand that you are also a woman, with desires, with fears, with wounds. And the most unfair thing of all is that you gave me everything without asking for anything in return. And still I never thanked you. Carol looked away. The atmosphere became dense, full of unspoken words. I have read your notebook. I have read your pain. And although I cannot erase what happened, I want you to know that since I read it, I am no longer the same. If you decide not to come back, I will understand. But if you decide to give us a second chance, I promise you will no longer be invisible. I promise I will honor you, not as a mother, but as the woman who saved me from an abandonment I didn't even know I had lived. Upon reaching the end, Mary pressed the paper against her chest. Her shoulders trembled. Carol went for a glass of water, but stopped before offering it. Do you want to be alone? Mary shook her head. No, stay, but I need to ask you something. Carol sat across from her. Why did you never tell me that you knew about the boy, that you knew he wasn't mine? Carol lowered her gaze. Because I guessed it, not because you told me. How? The day I saw you arrive with him in your arms, you didn't have any labor marks. You weren't swollen. Your eyes were empty, but your arms were firm, as if you were carrying a promise, not a son. Mary closed her eyes. I thought no one would notice. I noticed. But I understood that you didn't need questions. You needed respect. And I gave it to you, until now. Until now? Carol stood up. She walked toward her bedroom. It took a few minutes. When she returned, she held an old envelope sealed with red string in her hands. This arrived almost a year ago. A young man brought it. He said it was for you, that he didn't know if he was your relative, that he just wanted to leave it. Mary took the envelope. She recognized it instantly. The handwriting was the same as Mariana Vance's, but firmer, more adult. Who brought it? A young man, dark-haired, thin. He said his name was Gabriel Vance. Mary's heart stopped for a second. Vance? He said he was the son of Mariana's sister. Mary broke the seal. She took out the letter. Her eyes scanned the first lines. My name is Gabriel. My mother is Anne Vance. And all my life she told me a story about her missing sister, a sister who died giving birth, a son who was left in the hands of a brave woman. My mother always said that you, Mary Helen, were that woman, and that one day I had to find you, not to reclaim you, but to thank you, because that boy is my cousin, and he has a right to know. Mary let the letter fall onto the table. Her lips trembled. Robert has a living family. Carol walked closer. What are you going to do? Mary didn't answer right away. First, I'm going to read this calmly, and after that... Mary looked up. Her eyes shone with a mixture of fear and hope. After that, I will have to decide whether to open the last door that remains closed to me. What if that door hurts too? Then it will hurt, but I am no longer afraid of pain. I am afraid of continuing to carry secrets that no longer belong to me. Carol looked at her with respect. Then Mary, the time has come. And Mary, still with the envelope in her hands, walked to the altar she had in her room. She lit a candle, placed the letter in front of the image of St. Jude, and murmured, "If this is part of my destiny, let it come complete." Because even though her family was beginning to rebuild itself, the truth was far from over. And the next day, someone would knock on her door, someone who did not come from the past, but from Robert's future. The morning sun fell obliquely on the atrium of St. Gabriel's Church in Marblehead, illuminating the stone floor with a warm, ancient glow. Mary stopped in front of the church with the box still in her hands. Her chest didn't hurt, but it weighed. It was a different weight than in previous days. It wasn't the pain of contempt or the sadness of abandonment, but the weight of decision. Carol had insisted on accompanying her, but Mary preferred to walk alone. She wanted to enter the church with a clean soul, without voices around her, without lingering glances. She wanted to be alone, with her history. She entered slowly. She crossed herself as she had since she was a child and walked toward the second pew on the left, where she always sat when she went to Mass. There, in that same spot, she had once prayed with her knees bruised from scrubbing marble floors, asking that Robert, then a child, wouldn't realize the hunger she endured to feed him. That pew had seen everything, and now it would see her decide. She took out Gabriel's letter. She reread it. She didn't need to. She already knew it by heart. But it was as if her heart couldn't completely accept what her eyes had already understood. Robert not only had blood kin, he had a history. He had a wider family than the one she knew. And for the first time, he had the right to choose whether he wanted to look for them. Mary looked at the altar. The figure of St. Jude, her lifelong saint, seemed to observe her with that expression that mixes patience with resignation, as if saying, "Do the right thing, even if it hurts." She closed the letter, put it back in the envelope, and carefully placed it inside her purse. Then she stayed there, in silence, her gaze fixed on the tallest candle on the altar. She wasn't praying. She wasn't asking. She was just thinking about Mariana, about the decision she made to leave her son, about the favor she asked in dying whispers, about the trust she gave her without fully knowing her, about the unwritten debt, thinking about Gabriel, about that young man who had traveled alone with the need to close a family cycle, about his respect, his calm, his humble words, thinking about Robert, about his letter, about his repentance, about his sincere tears, about the boy she found at the entrance of a church and who was now a man looking for her with a soul broken by so many truths revealed at once. And then she knew. She could no longer hide. She couldn't burden another generation with the consequences of silence. She had to close the circle and open the door. She left the church with a calm face. She walked to Carol's house, where Carol was waiting for her at the entrance, with a cup of chamomile tea in her hands. "Have you decided?" Carol asked softly. Mary nodded. "Yes." "Are you coming back?" "Yes, but not like before. This time, I set the terms. This time, I don't return to serve. I return to be." Carol smiled tenderly. "What if they don't accept your terms?" "Then I won't stay." They entered the house together. Mary went to the room, took her old suitcase from the closet, and began to pack. She did it unhurriedly. She folded her clothes with the same care as always, but not with submission, with self-respect, with dignity. Claire had called her early. She told her they were waiting for her, but if she decided not to return, they would still understand. That the house was different, that there were real changes, that the children were waiting for her, not with guilt, but with love. And Mary decided to believe her, because something in her voice was different. When she finished packing, she placed Gabriel's letter on top of everything. Then, a new envelope. One she had written that same morning. An envelope with Robert's name. Because there was something else she still had to tell him. A truth she never said out of fear. A secret that wasn't even in the notebooks. A truth she had kept since the day Mariana died. A truth that, if Robert knew it, could change everything again. The car engine vibrated beneath his feet, but Robert heard nothing but his own breathing. He drove with his fingers tense on the steering wheel, as if clinging to that piece of metal to keep his balance. He had read his mother's letter. He had cried in silence in front of the notebook of secrets. He had seen his daughter write her words he never knew how to say. And now, finally, he was going to her. He didn't know if she would receive him. He didn't know if he would find her. But he couldn't wait any longer. He had taken the highway to Marblehead at dawn, after spending the night awake. Claire hugged him before he left. She didn't say much. She just handed him a wool scarf Mary had knitted years ago that no one had used since. "Take it to her," she said softly. "Maybe she'll recognize it as a sign." Robert nodded and put it in his coat pocket. Then he left, without looking back. When he arrived in the town, the air smelled of fresh pancakes, wood smoke, and past rain. The same smell of his childhood. The same one that accompanied him in the loose memories of the vacations he spent with his mother in Marblehead, when he was still a child who believed that love was eternal and that his mother knew everything. He parked the car in front of St. Gabriel's Church. He got out and walked with a firm step, but his heart was pounding. The last time he was there, Mary had left him talking to himself, with his head bowed, with a broken soul. This time, he didn't come to demand, nor to beg. He came to acknowledge. He asked a neighbor sweeping the sidewalk for Carol. She smiled tenderly. "Robert, right? You remember me?" "Of course. You look just like your mother when she was young. Come in." She's with Mrs. Mary in the kitchen. Robert's stomach clenched. He climbed the 3 porch steps as if they weighed 100 years. He knocked twice. He heard footsteps. And then the door opened. There she was, Mary, wearing a floral apron and her hair pulled back in a braid. She held a wooden spoon in her hand and an embroidered handkerchief hung from her pocket. Her face, though wrinkled, had a strength he hadn't seen in a long time. She didn't say anything. Neither did Robert. They looked at each other for several seconds. Then he took the scarf from his coat and placed it in her hands. "I didn't know if you'd ever want anything from this house again," he said, barely a whisper. "But Sophia left it for you. She said you knitted it for yourself, and that if you put it on, it meant you were coming back." Mary held the scarf for an instant. Then she looked at him. "And what do you think?" Robert swallowed. "I think that this time you deserve to choose, not to be asked to stay, but to be given reasons to want to." "And have you learned to give reasons?" "I'm working on it." Carol appeared behind her with a gentle smile. "Do you want to come in, son? We have spiced coffee and fresh bread." Mary didn't move, until, without a word, she stepped aside and let him enter. Robert crossed the threshold with a heavy heart. He walked into the kitchen, where everything smelled like a real home, like belonging, like the dignity his mother had reconquered. They sat down at the table. Mary poured the coffee with the same delicacy as always. Robert watched her intently. Every movement, every pause. It was as if he were seeing a new woman, but with her essence intact. He took Gabriel's letter from the inside pocket of his coat. He placed it on the table. Mary didn't touch it. "I already read it," she said. "Then you already know I have family, that there's someone else out there." "Yes, and I know you deserve to meet them, but there's something you still don't know." Robert looked at her, confused. "What?" Mary took a deep breath. Then she stood up and went to the room. She returned with a small, wrinkled envelope. She placed it in front of him. "I didn't give you this letter before, because I thought you weren't ready." Robert took it with trembling hands. He broke the seal. He began to read. And in that letter there was a confession that didn't come from Mariana, nor from Gabriel, nor from Father John. It was a confession that came directly from Mary, and what it said would put his entire past in a completely different light. Robert's hands were cold. The envelope his mother had given him weighed as if it contained more than a simple letter. Mary wasn't looking at him. Her gaze was fixed on the window overlooking Carol's patio, where the flower pots hung like memories, alive, but exposed to the wind. "Are you sure you want to read it now?" she asked without turning around. "I didn't come all this way to keep running, Mum," Robert replied, his voice low. "Don't call me Mum, not after what you're about to read." Robert looked at her. His heart skipped a beat, not because of the phrase, but because of the way she said it, with a sadness so old it seemed not to belong only to her. Mary stood up. She walked to the dining room, unhurriedly, silently. Robert followed her. They both sat face to face. The envelope remained on the table between them, like an invisible barrier, until Robert opened it. He took out the sheet. It was written in Mary's steady, neat handwriting. Every word was forcefully inked, as if the hand that wrote it had wanted to make it clear that these were not casual phrases. They were confessions. He began to read. "Robert, you already know you weren't born of me. But what you don't know is how you came into my arms. You weren't left in a church, as I first told you. You weren't given up by a desperate mother. You were stolen. Robert felt the air disappear from his lungs. He continued reading, his heart pounding. Mariana, your biological mother, did not ask me to care for you. She didn't know me. I only saw her once from a distance. It was at the hospital, the morning she gave birth. And I don't know what happened to me. I was empty, alone, aimless. I heard a nurse say that the girl who had just given birth had no family, that no one was going to claim the baby. I walked over to the hallway. I saw the child, and I took him, just like that, without thinking, like someone taking the only thing they have left. Robert stopped reading. His hands were shaking. The sheet fell onto the table. You stole me, he asked in a low voice, in a tone that had neither anger nor sadness, but a mixture of incredulity and vertigo. Mary didn't look up. Yes. Why? Because I had nothing, because I felt invisible, because at that instant I felt that destiny put you in front of me. Robert stood up. He paced the room. He didn't know whether to cry or scream. It was as if the history he had just begun to piece together was now crumbling again. All this time, all my life. I loved you as if you were mine, Mary interrupted without raising her voice. And I don't regret that. But I didn't tell you because I knew there was no way to justify it. And Mariana? Did you look for her? Afterward, yes. But when I went back to the hospital, she was gone. No one would tell me anything, and over the years, I thought she had died. Until I learned she had a sister, Anne, Gabriel's mother. Robert stopped. The name echoed in his head. So I do have living family? Yes, and they don't know the complete truth, only what I allowed to leak, that you had been left, that I saved you. But that wasn't how it happened. The silence became eternal, until Robert sat down again. I don't know what to feel, he said, because I hate you and I love you, because you made me lose everything, but you did it based on a lie. I don't expect you to forgive me, Mary said, her voice broken. I just needed you to hear it from me, before anyone else. Robert looked at her, and for an instant he saw her as if she were a different woman, a broken woman, a brave woman, a misguided woman. Why now? Because I don't want to die without giving you the option to choose. Choose what? If you want to continue calling me Mum, or just Mary. Robert was silent, and then, with eyes full of tears, but a firm voice, he said, I'm going to keep calling you Mum. Mary looked up. Not because you deserve it, but because that's what you are. You made a mistake, a grave one. But I cannot deny what you planted. I cannot deny what you gave me. She began to cry, this time without hiding, without looking at the ground, like someone releasing a 40-year burden. Robert walked closer. He hugged her, not like before, not as a scared son or a guilty adult. He hugged her as a man who understands that love, sometimes, also comes from mistakes that become decisions. But what neither of them knew was that someone else was already on their way. Someone who would arrive in Marblehead that very afternoon. Someone with Mariana's face, and the words of a truth that was still missing from the story. The dining room clock struck 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The air in Carol's house was heavy with memories, recent conversations, revealed truths. Mary remained silent, her arms crossed, sitting in her chair by the window. Robert was still in the guest room, digesting every word of the letter his mother had confessed to him with a bleeding soul. But there was something else. Carol knew it, and she couldn't keep quiet any longer. She prepared coffee. She made it the way Mary had taught her when they were young, with brown sugar and a cinnamon stick. She poured it into an earthenware cup and placed it in front of her. "Do you have the strength for one more truth?" she asked. Mary looked up, tired but lucid. "If I've endured mine, I can handle yours." Carol sat on the other side of the table. She opened a drawer in the dresser, took out a small wooden box, the same one where she kept things she didn't want to see every day. She put it between them. "That is yours," she said. Mary frowned. "What is it?" "Money. The money I borrowed from you more than 20 years ago." Mary was silent. "That was a lifetime ago, and I spent that whole life pretending I had forgotten it, that you didn't need it back, that you never mentioned it because you didn't care." "I didn't care," Mary replied without anger. "I did it because you were my friend." Carol pressed her lips together. She swallowed. "But now I understand that even though you didn't say it, I should have returned it. Not out of obligation, but out of dignity. Because just as you gave, I should have honored it. But I kept quiet, just like you." She opened the box. Inside were several bundles of bills carefully rolled up, kept in recycled paper envelopes. There was also a note. "I have been saving them every year, a little, when I could. A little when I remembered what you kept silent about. Today, I want you to take it, not as payment, but as a symbol. That I don't want to owe you anything else, not with money, nor with affection, nor with silence." Mary looked at her for a long time. Then she took the box, closed it, and pushed it back. "I don't want it, Carol." "You already paid it, Carol. You paid it the day you opened your house to me when I had nowhere to go. You paid it when you gave me back the name I had forgotten. You paid it by sitting next to me when even my son didn't dare to." Carol looked down. Mary stood up, walked to her and took her hands. "You don't owe me anything, because I don't owe you anything either. All that remains is what we are now, and that you don't pay for with bills." At that moment, the street door opened. Robert appeared in the frame, his eyes still red, but serene. "Gabriel is here." The two women looked at him surprised. "Gabriel?" Mary asked. "Yes. He came all the way here. He's on the curb. He didn't want to come in without your permission." Mary tightened her grip on the handkerchief in her pocket. "Did you tell him I read his letter?" "No. I just told him you're alive, that you're strong, and that you already know who he is." Carol stood up and went to the door. She peered out. There he was, a young man around 30 years old, tall, thin, with a serious face, but with the same eyes Mary had seen in the mirror for decades. Eyes that Robert also had. Mariana's eyes. "Shall I let him in?" Carol asked, as if she knew that what was about to happen would mark the beginning of a new chapter. Mary remained silent, and then without moving, she said, "Tell him to come in." Gabriel entered, and with him, a truth that neither the letters, nor the silences, nor the years had been able to touch. A living truth, of flesh and blood. And in his hand, Gabriel held a worn photograph of a young woman, one Mary hadn't seen since the night she changed her destiny forever. Gabriel entered the house slowly, his face serene, but his eyes bright. He held a black and white photograph in his right hand. It was the only image he had of Mariana, his aunt, the woman he never met, but who he had heard named throughout his childhood as a half-buried whisper. Mary remained standing, next to the table. Carol and Robert looked at her without daring to speak. Gabriel walked up to her and held out the photo. "This is my Aunt Mariana," he said. "My mother's only sister. Her absence raised me." Mary took the image with firm hands. Her heart constricted. She recognized that young face, that sweet but sad look. It was her, the same one she saw in the hospital delivery room that morning, the same one who gave meaning to her life and her guilt. "I didn't think I would ever see her face again," she murmured. Gabriel nodded. "My mother didn't talk much about her. She said it was a painful subject. But in the last few years, before she died, she told me everything she knew. And she told me that if I ever had the chance to find the woman who had raised Mariana's son, I should do it." Robert took a step toward the young man. "And why now?" "Because I also want to know who I am," Gabriel replied without hesitation. "And because he pointed to Robert, has the right to know where he comes from." Mary sat down. The photograph remained on the table, next to the letter he had given her days before. She was silent for a long time. No one dared to interrupt her. "Did you know that I took him?" she finally asked, without looking at him. "Yes," he replied. "I found out recently, from a letter my mum left me before she died. And I also knew you didn't do it out of malice." Mary looked at him for the first time with eyes full of tears. "No, I did it out of desperation, out of emptiness, out of a need to love someone who wasn't mine, but who became more mine than anyone." "And I respect that," Gabriel said. "But Robert deserves to know everything. He deserves to decide if he wants to meet the rest of our family." "And you too," Mary nodded. "I didn't come here to take anything away," Gabriel added. "I came to add, to heal, to close something that has been open for more than 30 years. Robert took a step toward his mother. "Mum?" Mary looked at him. "What are you going to do?" She sighed. "I'm going to tell the truth, even if it hurts. But I'm not going back to a house where I'm only needed when something breaks. I'm not a grandma replacement. I'm not a cleaning service with a heart." Robert nodded. He didn't argue. "So you won't come back?" "Not now, because I still need to rebuild myself away from what broke me." Carol placed a hand on her shoulder. "You have the right, and time, and space." Gabriel looked at both of them. "I also need to process this, but I came with the truth. You will know what to do with it." The four of them stayed in the living room, sitting, their hands clasped, with the silence that only exists when everything has been said. That night, Mary walked alone to the chapel. She lit a candle for Mariana, another for Gabriel, and one more for herself. And there, kneeling in front of the altar, she pronounced the words she hadn't been able to say out loud. "I don't regret having loved you, Robert, even though you weren't mine. But now, I need to love me, for the first time." But while she was finally trying to let go of the past, something was happening in New York. Claire, in Mary's room, was opening the last box that remained closed. One she had respected for years. And inside that box, among old photos, she found something she didn't expect. A sheet signed by a notary, with a will no one knew existed. The afternoon light filtered through the curtains of the utility room. Mary's room was still the same as the day she left. The towels neatly folded, the crucifix crooked on the wall, and the dresser with the white tablecloth she herself embroidered with green threads. Nothing had changed. But Claire was no longer the same. She was there, alone, standing in front of the small wooden dresser where Mary kept everything that didn't fit on the table. And with trembling hands, she dared to open it. She wasn't looking for anything in particular. She just needed to understand, to feel, to connect. Among the sheets, handkerchiefs, and old clothes, she found a tin box, somewhat rusty, wrapped in a blue plaid blanket. She opened it carefully. Inside were photos of Robert as a child, birthday cards with clumsy drawings signed by Sophia and Ethan, recipe clippings, holy cards, and, at the bottom, a manila envelope sealed with a notary's stamp. Claire felt a jolt in her chest. She took it out. It was addressed to Mary Helen Harrison. She opened the metal clasp and slid out the contents. It was a will, signed by a New York notary, dated more than 5 years ago. Claire read line by line, every word hitting her soul like a stone. I, Mary Helen Harrison, in full use of my mental and physical faculties, declare my will regarding my material assets. She moved to the central paragraph, her eyes clouded. I declare that the house where I currently reside, located in the Forest Hills neighborhood, was acquired with funds from the sale of my personal property in Appalachia, for which reason I have full rights over it, regardless of the name under which it was registered. Claire brought her hands to her mouth. Mary had not only sold her home for Robert, she had also put the house in his name, but the property legally belonged to her. She continued reading. And I leave as sole and universal heirs of said property my grandchildren, Sophia and Ethan, for being the ones who saw me without conditions, the ones who looked for me with their hearts, not out of need. Claire let out a sob. She fell to her knees in front of the bed. She rested the will on the bedspread. She closed her eyes, and there, regardless of pride, without thinking about her dignity, she prayed. Mary, if you can hear me, forgive me, not for having yelled at her, nor for having forced her to serve, but for having believed that she had nothing, when, in reality, she had given everything. Hours later, Claire packed a change of clothes, put the will in an envelope, and left the house without telling Robert or the children anything. She took the bus to the train station, and from there a rideshare to Marblehead. She already knew the address. Robert had given it to her days before. He said Mary was staying at Carol's house, her lifelong friend. Claire didn't know how she would be received, but she also couldn't continue living with the biggest moral debt of her life. When she arrived at the street, the sky was starting to darken. She knocked softly on the door, once, twice. No one opened. She walked toward the side gate. She pushed it slightly and heard voices inside. "Mary?" she called. Carol? The patio was illuminated with yellow light. There was a scent of freshly baked bread and spiced coffee. Claire advanced slowly. Her footsteps echoed on the ground as if she were invading a sacred space. In the living room, Carol was knitting silently. Mary was sitting next to Gabriel, looking at an old photograph. Carol was the first to see her. "Good evening." Claire nodded, her eyes teary. "May I?" Mary slowly turned her face. Her gaze had no hardness, only distance. "What are you doing here, Claire?" Claire walked closer. She opened her purse. She took out the will. She placed it on the table. She took a step back. And then she knelt down. "I didn't come to beg you to come back," she said, her voice broken. "I came to give you back your place. I came to give you the right that was always yours, the house, your dignity, your history." Mary didn't move. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, I know, but Sophia and Ethan do deserve for you to see them grow up, for you to continue guiding them, for you to teach them that love is not begged for, but it is honored." Silence. "I am not the same woman who humiliated you. Today I know that you were a mother to everyone. And I was blind." Mary took a deep breath. Then she stood up. She walked up to Claire. She observed her standing, imposing, without tears. but with her throat tight. "Get up," Claire obeyed. "What you did is not erased with words, but the fact that you are here tells me that you changed, that you learned, and that is already something." Claire didn't know what to say. "Can I hug you?" she asked, her eyes flooded. Mary hesitated, but then she remembered Ethan's words, that dream Robert had told her about. "Granny hugged me and gave me something, but it wasn't an object. It was her." And just like that, Mary opened her arms, and both of them finally cried on each other's shoulders. But while redemption was born in that hug, something else was about to happen. At the entrance of the house, Gabriel received an unexpected call. A voice on the other end of the line told him that someone was looking for Mary, not for her past, but for a decision she had made in the present. That morning, Mary woke up with a clear mind and a decision made. After so many letters, visits, silences, and unearthed truths, she knew exactly what she needed to return. Not just to the house she herself had helped build with sacrifice, but to her place in the world. No longer as a subservient presence, nor as the woman who cooked in silence, but as Mary Helen Harrison. As a grandmother, yes. As a mother, also. But above all as a person. At the breakfast table, while Carol prepared eggs with onions, Mary spoke with a firm voice. "Today I'm coming back." Carol looked at her without saying a word, but her eyebrow raised, as it did when something intrigued her. "Are you sure?" "Yes, but under my conditions." "And do they know?" "Not yet, but they're about to find out." Robert and Claire were sitting in the living room when Gabriel's car stopped in front of the house. It was noon. The sun was shining brightly on the gate, and a warm breeze stirred the window curtains. Claire opened the door first. Ethan and Sophia ran when they heard the engine. And then they saw her. Mary, getting out with a firm step, cane in hand, a short-brimmed hat, and an expression on her face that admitted no interpretations. She was there because she decided it, not because they asked her to. Sophia was the first to hug her. "Granny!" Mary bent down as best she could and wrapped her in her arms. Ethan joined in. The three of them merged into a hug that needed no words. Robert walked closer. Claire too. Both, still. Mary looked at them directly. "Thank you for having me back, but I want to make something very clear from the start." Robert nodded. "Whatever you say, Mum." Mary took a deep breath. "I am not coming back as before. I am not coming back to clean, nor to cook out of obligation, nor to babysit as if I were the only adult in the house. I am not an employee. I am not a shadow. I am a woman. I am a grandmother. And now I am also free." Claire swallowed. "You want your room?" "No, I want a new room, with a window. I want curtains that I choose, a shelf for my books, and a lock that no one touches but me." Robert smiled with respect. "You'll have it." "I want a schedule for rest. I want to be invited to sit at the table, not expected to serve first. I want to voice my opinion without being told, 'It's none of your business.' Because this house, I built it with my steps." "And we will acknowledge it," Claire said, her eyes damp. "And I want Ethan and Sophia to know they can talk to me about everything. No secrets, no more lies in this house. If we are going to be a family again, it will be with truth at the forefront." Sophia took her hand. "And are you going to make banana rice again?" Mary smiled. "Yes, my love, but only if you help me chop the bananas." Everyone laughed, but Mary didn't let down her guard. "I'm going to need time to heal completely, and you too. But today we start over." Robert hugged her without saying anything. That afternoon, Mary settled into the room they used to store old things. Robert and Ethan cleaned it. Claire hung the curtains. Sophia decorated it with drawings. And Gabriel, from a corner, watched with bright eyes how that seemingly fragile woman took control of her story again. "Are you staying long?" Mary asked him while they had coffee on the patio. "As long as it takes to close all this," Gabriel replied. "And for Robert to see me for what I am, family." "He is," Robert said from the kitchen. "I don't know how, but he is." And that night, for the first time since Mary left, the table was full, everyone sitting, everyone eating together, and she in the center. But when dinner was over and the conversation turned light, someone knocked on the door. A woman, a stranger, in simple clothes and a nervous face. "Mrs. Mary Helen?" she asked from the threshold. "That's me," Mary replied cautiously. "You don't know me, but my mother always spoke to me about you." Everyone fell silent. "My mother's name was Mariana Vance." And then Mary stood up, because that young woman's voice was the same as her mother's, and what she brought with her was not from the past. It was what could change the entire future. Mary stood in front of the young woman in the doorway for a few seconds that felt eternal. In her dark, large, and moist eyes, Mary recognized something that chilled her soul. Mariana's same look, but not in a photograph, nor in dreams. It was her. It was her blood, her voice, her history. "Alive, what did you say your name was?" she asked, still not moving. "Mariana Vance, the same as my mother. I was named after her in her honor." Robert stood up. Gabriel tensed. Claire approached from the kitchen with a confused expression. Ethan and Sophia, curious but silent, watched from the hallway. "My mother always talked about you," the young woman continued, "about how you took the baby, about how, even though you took him, she didn't blame you, because she knew you would love him more than anyone." Mary couldn't believe what she was hearing. She knew that I... Yes, she always knew. She didn't die at the hospital. She survived, but she was in a coma for weeks. And when she woke up, the baby was gone. She never wanted to file a police report. She said that if someone had taken him, it was because they needed him more than she did. But she made me promise that I would find you someday, and that I would give you this. She took a wrinkled envelope from her backpack. She held it out to Mary. The old woman took it without words. "Thank you," she finally murmured, her voice hoarse. "I didn't know she had forgiven me." "She didn't just forgive you," Mariana said. "She thanked you, every day." The atmosphere in the living room was so dense that none of the adults were breathing normally, until Sophia, with the naturalness of someone who is not yet broken by life, said, "So you are family too?" Mariana looked at her and smiled for the first time. "Yes, but I came to meet you, not to reclaim anything." "Do you want to stay for dinner?" Ethan asked. Mary laughed softly, wiping a tear with her cardigan sleeve. "In this house, food is never denied to anyone who comes with truth in their hands." That night, for the first time, the house was not a space of tensions, but of encounters. The kitchen smelled of banana rice, as it did in the old days. Claire helped Mary without being asked. Robert peeled the bananas, Ethan set the table, Sophia decorated it with embroidered napkins, and Mariana sat with them. Not as a visitor, but as a piece that had always been missing from the puzzle. During dinner, Mary read Mother Mariana's letter out loud to them. In it, the woman recounted how she resigned herself to living without her son, blindly trusting the woman who had raised him. She also recounted that she never felt hatred, only hope. And at the end, she wrote a phrase that brought tears to everyone present. Love doesn't always choose the right path. Sometimes it makes mistakes, but if it cares in the end, then it's worth it. Robert couldn't stop looking at Mariana, the daughter. It was like looking at a part of himself that had always been alien to him. Claire squeezed his hand under the table. Sophia rested her head on Mary's arm. Ethan ate in silence, his eyes wide open. "This house is no longer the same," Mary murmured, looking around. "And I'm glad it's not." "Are you going to stay, Granny?" Sophia asked. Mary looked at her and smiled. "I'm never going to leave again." Mariana raised her coffee cup. "Then may this be the first toast of many." And everyone raised theirs. No one said cheers, but everyone toasted with their eyes. That night, Mary returned to her room, the new room, with a window, floral curtains, a shelf with her books, a vase of sunflowers, and a wooden chair in front of the window. She placed the last 2 letters on the nightstand, the one from Mariana the mother and the one from Mariana the daughter. Then she sat in front of the mirror. She looked at herself. And finally she recognized herself. She was the same, but also different. One who no longer cried in secret. One who no longer expected silent gratitude. One who now knew that her story, no matter how hard it had been, was worth telling. And she would. But first, she had to make one final gesture, one that wasn't for Robert, nor for Claire, not even for Mariana. It was for the only ones who never stopped looking for her. Sophia and Ethan. And that gesture was written in her will. It was Sunday afternoon when Mary gathered everyone in the living room. No one knew for sure why, but the tone with which she called them left no room for evasion. Robert settled into the armchair with a straight back. Claire sat next to him without letting go of his hand. Ethan and Sophia sat on the floor, their eyes wide with expectation for something important. Gabriel stood, near the doorframe. And Mariana, the young woman who had arrived days earlier, stood silently by the window, watching without intervening. Mary appeared with a wooden box. It was the same one where for years she had kept what no one should see. She placed it on the table. She took out a sealed envelope and held it between her hands. "What I am about to read was not written yesterday or last week. I wrote it 5 years ago," she said. "But today, finally, I am ready for you to hear it." She slid the will out of the envelope and began to read in a clear, measured voice, without trembling. "I, Mary Helen Harrison, declare that this house, located in the Forest Hills neighborhood, was purchased with the proceeds from the sale of my property in Appalachia. Although it was legally registered in my son's name for personal reasons, the property is entirely the result of my effort and sacrifice. Therefore, I formally declare my will regarding the disposition of this house." Everyone remained motionless. "I declare that this house will not be inherited by Robert Harrison, nor his wife Claire, not out of resentment, but because they already received the most valuable thing I had to give them: my time, my body, my care, and my silence. My decision is not a punishment, it is justice." Robert closed his eyes. Claire squeezed him tighter. "I leave as the sole heirs of this house my grandchildren Sophia Harrison and Ethan Harrison, who saw me when no one else did. They looked for me with their souls. They listened to me with their hearts. The future belongs to them, and for that reason, I give them what I built with the past." Sophia and Ethan didn't fully understand, but they knew that what they were hearing was important, very important. "I want this house to be a place where no one is ever again forced to serve in silence, where everyone has the right to be heard, where affection is not measured by what is done, but by what is shared. Mary lowered the paper. She looked at each of them with clear eyes. "You have my forgiveness," she said, looking at Robert and Claire. "But my grandchildren have my hope. And to them I leave the only thing I have left, the home I wasn't allowed to have, but which I myself created with every step, every meal, every sleepless morning." Robert stood up. He walked up to her. He didn't try to argue. "Thank you, Mum," he said, his voice broken. "Thank you for saying that," Mary replied, smiling. Gabriel walked closer. Mariana too. No one was crying this time. It was a scene of calm, as if after so much, finally time had stopped, just to give them the chance to start over. Sophia walked up to her grandmother and asked in a soft voice, "So, is this house ours now?" Mary bent down, looked her in the eyes, and stroked her hair. "It's yours, my love. But the most important thing is not that it's yours on paper, but because you learned not to take me for granted. And that is worth more than a signature. And can we hang your photos on all the walls? Only if you let me smile in every one." Everyone laughed. That night, Sophia drew Mary again. But not in the kitchen, not sweeping, nor wearing an apron. She drew her sitting on the porch, with a cup of tea, surrounded by plants, looking at the sky. And underneath she wrote in large letters, "Now Granny really lives here. If you made it this far, thank you for joining us in this story that taught us that it's not just about blood or duties, but about respect, recognition, and real love." If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next stories, and leave us the word "root" in the comments to let us know you stayed until the end. And if you want to help us continue sharing stories that truly touch the soul, you can leave a super thanks. Your support makes it possible for this channel to continue creating deep and human content like this. Thank you for staying. Thank you for feeling. And thank you, like Mary, for not stopping believing in new beginnings.